Okay, I call this meeting to order. It's the Board of Directors special meeting of the Fort Ord Use Authority. It's Friday, May 10th, about 2 o'clock. We have a quorum at this time. We'll be going to closed session very shortly. The closed session is about conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, government code 54956.9 alpha, 5 cases. Concerning Keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Use Authority, case numbers M114961, M116438, M119217. Next case would be Bogan versus Hulamard, case number M122980. 3, the City of Marina versus Fort Ord Use Authority, case number M118566. And we'll be discussing public employee performance evaluation executive officer via government code 54957. Before we go into closed session, does any member of the public have any wish to address the board with regard to any of the items we'll be covering on closed session? Okay, seeing none, we are now adjourned in open session. We'll be reconvening next door. I'm sorry, did somebody say they wanted to say something? Did you want to say something?
They're all closed session items. We don't know what they are to begin with.
Well, no, by law, just explain to the pub, by law, you guys can say anything you want to, and these are we will report out on closed session when we come back, and we'll try and provide as much information we can. Okay, thanks. Again, we're adjourned in open session, reconvening next door in closed session. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. We're reconvening an open session after the closed session. Mr. John Giffen, would you please report out from closed session, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The board heard a report from legal counsel on 5 separate cases, and there's just one matter to report out on. That is that the board approved the retention of Kennedy, Archer, and Giffen to defend FORA in the Bogan versus Hulamard case, and to revisit the case as it progressed to determine the need for a special elections law consultant as we move forward. End of report.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next, Pledge of Allegiance. I would ask Mr. Tom Moore if he would lead us in the pledge.
Please salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Tom. Let's go ahead and have a roll call very quick, please.
City of Carmel by the Sea, Mayor Burnett.
Here.
City of Delray Oaks, Chair Edelin.
Here.
City of Marina, Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell.
Here.
City of Marina, Councilmember Morton.
Here.
City of Monterey, Councilmember Selfridge.
Here.
Monterey County Supervisor Potter. Monterey County Supervisor Salinas. Monterey County Supervisor Parker. City of Pacific Grove, Mayor Camp. City of Salinas, Mayor Gunter. City of Sand City, Mayor Pendergrass. City of Seaside, Mayor Rubio. City of Seaside, Mayor Pro Tem Oglesby.
Here.
20th Congressional District, Congressman Farr. 17th State Senate District, Nicole Charles. 29th State Assembly District, Erica Parker. University of California, Graham Bice. California State University, Andre Lewis. Monterey Peninsula College, Vicky Nakamura. Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, Marilyn Shepard. Monterey Salinas Transit, Hunter Harvath.
Here.
Transportation Agency of Monterey County, Debbie Hale. United States Army, Colonel Clark. Fort Ord BRAC Office, Bill Collins.
Here.
Marina Coast Water District, Director Moore.
Here.
Chair Edelin, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Lena. Next is acknowledgments, announcements, correspondence. Board members will notice numerous items on a table in front of them. Copies of these board items are available to the public on the table in the hallway. These items were not distributed in the board packet because they were dependent upon committee input received during the last couple of days. Michael, you have no other announcements? Okay. Okay, that does that. Next, consent agenda. Items 6D, 6E, and 6F were distributed via email after Monday's legislative committee meeting. Copies are also provided on the table. Any member of the board wish to pull any items for discussion or questions on the consent agenda? Yes. Bill. Okay, we're pulling 6B. Any other items for pulling from the consent agenda by members of the board?
6C.
Okay, 6C. Any other items by board members? Okay.
Move the remainder.
Okay, we have a motion from Ralph Rubio for the motion, and Frank O'Connell for second. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, 6B. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The practical question that I would appreciate thoughts from my colleagues on is how many people can effectively engage in dialogue on closed session matters. This is a very difficult format with this many people around the table. I cherish everybody's presence. Closed session matters usually really do need a level of candor and participation, and it's very hard to get that as we expand the size of the group. And I'd just like to hear anyone else's thoughts. If nobody else is uncomfortable, I'd be fine. I'll stop there.
Okay, any other comments by members of the board with regard to the ex officio representation? Personally, if we had 5 ex officio members that really wanted to be a member to participate in everything, I would agree to some extent. But right now, we've had one member step forward that really wants to be active. They've been participating. They specifically requested, and they've been participating as a team player. There's just one, and personally, just increasing the participation by one hopefully won't cause any problems there. Any other comments? Questions out to the public? Any comments or questions by members of the public? Yes.
Levon Stone, FORA Environmental Justice Network. I would like to know what B is about, and D and E and F. And I'm willing to participate if you don't have enough people to participate in these sessions that are not part of the board meeting. And so that way, maybe we can get more information before time. Let me know.
Thank you. Any other members of the public having any other comments? Okay, thank you, Yvonne, for your volunteering to participate in the future. We'll keep that in mind. Okay, back to the board. Let's go ahead and take care of 6B first.
Second.
Okay, the motion was from? Okay, I'm sorry, Jane.
Thank you. Yes, I should have asked this under questions, but one thing that I did speak to council about was to double check. I think we can make any changes to our bylaws that we want to, but I just want to make sure that the Brown Act allows ex officio members to participate in closed session. So it's no reason to
John,
stop the action today,
now?
but he's going to look into that.
I will look into that as requested, yeah.
Yes, Ian.
And I just want to remind the board that that member is elected every year and it rotates, so it's just not about the college itself.
Okay, thank you. Good comment. Any other comments, questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor for this one item. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? The motion carries. Next is 6C. Who was the one that brought that up?
I pulled that.
Okay, Tom, please.
So just a little bit of a clarification. I just wanted to point out, first of all, that the rates, you don't need to reconfirm the rates. The Marina Coast Water District doesn't change the rates unless you change them and they change them simultaneously. So the rates are continuing. So effectively, I just want to make sure that you all understand that the essence of this particular motion is basically to continue the budget into the next fiscal year until we get the rate study done, which is due back from our consultant in the August timeframe. So at that point, we will be bringing to you any potential rate changes, don't know if there will be any, and any significant potential budgetary changes. And staff has asked me just to point out, your staff report indicated that Marina Coast staff had asked for this. Marina Coast staff says, no, we didn't ask for this. It arose somehow. That might have just been a minor miscommunication in the Water and Wastewater Oversight Committee. I don't know. I wasn't there. So,
Questions by board members? Yes, Bill.
If the real goal was to get the budget approved on an interim basis, unfortunately, I'm not seeing that in the agenda item. Can we consider that? This is rates, fees, and charges.
Yes,
Very,
Steve.
very briefly, the facilities agreement between FORA and MCWD actually has a provision in it that would allow for carryover of that budget if no action is taken. This gives the board an opportunity to make an affirmative statement if it wishes to, but does not have to.
Other comments by board members? Seeing none, out to the public. Any public comment on 6C? Seeing none, back to the board. I would entertain a motion.
I'll move to table this non-action.
We've been asked to pass this as part of the consent agenda. We have a motion to table it now. Tom, do you have any comment on this?
no objections.
No objections? I'm sorry? Staff agrees to table. We have a motion by Mayor Kempf to table a motion. Do I have a second? Councilwoman Morton. Okay. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Sort of a strange turn of events. Okay, next we have old business. Denise Duffy and Associates Contract Amendment Number 7. Michael?
Yes, Chair Edelin, members of the board, this authorizes an additional expenditure under the existing contract with Denise Duffy to continue the work that she and her firm are doing for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but that we're required to pay. This was anticipated in the FORA budget, and therefore we request board approval.
Question by board members. Saying none, out to the public. Public comment on this item. Saying none, back to the board.
Move staff recommendation.
Okay, Mayor Rubio is the motion maker, and Mayor Gunter is the second to the motion. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We might get out of here before 5 o'clock today.
Oh my gosh!
I've just jinxed this, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. Boy, I really screwed that one up. Okay, 7B, base reuse plan, post reassessment follow-up, category 1. Before we get started here, just a personal note, I would like to thank the committee members. Thus far, they put 9 hours in a small room. You've got Jane Parker, Ian Oglesby, Gail Morton, Victoria Beach, Tom Moore, and Andre Lewis. So I do appreciate the hard work, and that's the first 3 meetings. We've got several meetings scheduled. So again, I appreciate it very much. Michael, why don't you take this one away?
Yes, Chair Edelin, members of the board, I'm going to attempt on behalf of the Post-Reassessment Advisory Committee to outline the status on the discussion that's been ongoing. Just real briefly, since the last board meeting, the committee has met and generally concurred with staff's draft summary document of the committee's review on Category 1, the text edits by and large. In fact, I would call the general concurrence to be a unanimous general concurrence of those. Then May 1st, the Administrative Committee received from Carl Holm a specific comment that was tied to one particular parcel within the text, and has asked that that be carried over into a separate discussion, and the committee met today and made a determination to carry that over to Category 4 as a discussion, and so that's reflected today in your board report. Also this morning, the PRAC did a rather extensive review and concurred with that specific edit, and if you want to just follow with me, I'm going to try to describe in broad terms, but as specific as possible on behalf of the committee, exactly the status. So in this, what I would call an engaged, collaborative, robust, and deliberative process, the result has been a unanimous committee member agreement on every item that's come before the committee so far, and that includes the text edits I mentioned before, as well as the items that need to go into Category 4 for further discussion, and how the Category 3 items might interface with the Category 4 items. The members also developed a set of a framework, I'll call it, guidelines in essence, for correcting and updating the base reuse plan maps and figures as a component that may be a part of a future base reuse plan republication effort if approved by the board. That particular agreed upon approach includes keeping and maintaining the date stamped copies of all original base reuse plan figures as is for archival historical context purposes. 2, and these are not in any specific priority order, but they are all important, drawing a clear distinction between Category 1 figure corrections and updates I mentioned before, and moving forward with incorporating those corrections of a purely typo formatting nature while ensuring that future map updates reflecting the changed circumstances are adequately explained and vetted, and then included all the way down the process. And adding future figure updates to the base reuse plan's record rather than replacing or substituting for past versions, therefore showing a building of each step down the road, the initial approval, changes as they occur, and corrections and edits, so that the public is always informed of those, and including any particular notes and information that explain the reasons for each of the individual changes to the figure, so that each individual change is fully and completely documented. So today you have in front of you an attachment A and an attachment B. The attachment A are the corrections in text that the committee reviewed and unanimously concurred in their approach. You also have an attachment B in front of you. That attachment B is a draft worksheet that summarizes the committee's general guidelines and how they apply to individual figures. After discussions this morning, the committee recommended that staff should generally follow these guidelines when developing any future work products, which is new versions of the BRP maps or guidelines. And as a next step, that additional materials to be reviewed by the Post-Reassessment Advisory Committee have draft map updates that show the specific item by item changes and redlined onto the actual figures. We also intend to try to provide this for everybody here at the board level, but the PRAC is in essence doing all of this hard yeoman work on behalf of the board so that we don't have to duplicate each and every one of those minutes of the 9 hours of work here at the board. So I just want to stop at that point, Chair. I think that's a good point where the board might want to wrestle with that first series of comments, and maybe members of the PRAC may want to add.
First of all, any members of the PRAC, would you like to add to what Michael has explained thus far? I guess seeing none, any questions or comments by members of the board? Okay, we'll be going on to Category 4.
Right. So with respect to the Category 4 status report, it's really not fully explained as a specific member recommendation today, but in your board packet under the staff report, there was a comment about moving ahead with Category 4, and you'll see that under your board report. The Post-Reassessment Advisory Committee today looked at the subject areas and attempt to bring them into focus as potential priority recommendations in the future, and this will need more fleshing out. But at this particular point, the PRAC is considering recommending that we move ahead with the Dr. Ochoa offered opportunity to do an educational envisioning process as a very early step and as we move forward. That number 2, there would be a prioritization of and focus on the regional urban design guidelines. They are critically important, and they can be used as a means of implementing sort of what the regional vision as the original 1997 plan anticipated. 3, focus attention on blight removal and the funding of blight removal, as it is relevant to multiple base reuse plan goals, community goals, and was expressed repeatedly during the base reassessment process, base reuse plan reassessment process. 4, the designation of the national monument and why that is critically important to all the elements of the base reuse plan, to the jurisdictions and the region, and how outdoor recreation and tourism can be a very central component to economic development, and how open space access and a comprehensive trail network will benefit all of the jurisdictions and those potential economic tourism-based opportunities. And then 5, revisiting FORA's CIP fee formulas and underlying assumptions and how they are relevant to the current conditions. That is not to change the fee, but the underlying assumptions that had to do with how we fund different things, how we use land sales for certain things, and how do we look at those funding assumptions moving forward to sustain the level of consistency and to sustain certainty that we know both the development community and the jurisdictions want.
Any board questions or comments with regard to the Category 4? I'd just like to make a comment that we started Category 4 at the last 15 minutes of our 3 hours this morning, so we've spent almost 9 hours discussing Category 1. Category 1 was initially brought before the board as a just correcting maps and typographical errors, and we were voting an up or down on doing that. So that simple motion turned into 9 hours of work. So Category 4 is going to be probably much more intensive than that. And the 5 items that Michael mentioned were discussed this morning, but there will be other things added, I'm sure. We didn't receive a 100% consensus with regard to other areas. For example, economic development, and some of the others we'll be discussing in detail. So this is more of a status report. Okay, questions? Again, board members, or was there any comments, questions? Yes, Jane.
Thank you for your comments. I just wanted to reiterate that it really has been a very thorough and thoughtful and really interesting process, and that the items that Mr. Hulamard mentioned about Category 4, that was did reflect the discussion, but we didn't have all of our committee members there, so it's not a finished product in any way. It's just the beginning of a conversation that definitely will be ongoing, so we can include all the voices.
Thank you, Jane. Any other, Gail?
I just wanted to affirm, I think we're meeting to announce to the public the next meeting date, which was May 20th? May 20th at 1:30, and to affirm that this is an open meeting, and so the public has every opportunity to be present and to follow what's happening and really to witness how thorough the review is by the members. And I think that's extending your invitation.
And just to add to that, we have a diverse variety of interests and ideas and so forth. It's very interesting to watch the interaction and actually cooperation. And Ian is sitting between Jane and Gail. Is that they keep him under line pretty well most of the time, it seems like. So, okay, out to the public. Any questions or comments? Public comment from the public with regard to this item?
Yvonne Stone, FORA Environmental Justice Network. I may be misunderstanding what you all are doing, but I don't see any indication concerning the projects from the local community people here, the impacted community. I don't see where the decision-making process is being inclusive of our communities. And I must remind you that Congressman Farr made a statement the last time he was here about, you know, we got this project done and that project done. Now we need to work on these projects for the community. Evidently, that's what he said. And so I'm still waiting to find out. We have people here who have suffered and are still suffering economically with jobs, with housing. We don't have any projects that are bringing these kinds of needs into our communities. And this is a very, very serious situation that we have. And I know you all are doing a good job with talking about the different things that need to be done, these legal things and all that, but still the people here are still waiting to be included. Whatever projects that are coming into our communities, we need to have a voice and be able to participate in the decisions about these things and find out how these funds or whatever is coming into our community is going to help with the needs that we have.
Thank you, ma'am. And hopefully the post-reassessment process we're going through will simplify and clarify the overall base reuse plan, and we'll bring some more development in here to meet your goals. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Nancy Amadeo. There was a statement of one of the issues was a priority on blight, and not just the removal of blight, but development on blight. And so perhaps in those discussions, it could be included that those areas that are blighted and unspoken for, in other words, there are a lot of areas that are blighted but are either under contract or they belong to the university, that be very clear what those blighted areas are that are still available for development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other members of the public wish to give public comment? Seeing none, public comment period is closed. Back to the board. The staff and the subcommittee are asking for recommendations 1 and 3. 2, we still have some work to do on 2. And 1 and 3, we still have a lot of work to do on 1 and 3. We've done all the yeoman's work there, but we've had a request to bring back actual maps with all the intellectual changes we wanted to make. We want to see it in color on the maps so it can be looked at for one final time, so we're not missing anything, overlooking anything. So I would entertain a motion for a move to incorporate the Post-Reassessment Advisory Committee, PRAC Committee recommendations regarding reassessment category 1 text corrections into the future base reuse plan, compilation and republication. That's recommendation I, and then also recommendation 3, which is to include in attachment A an additional category 1 text edit related to BRP Polygon 17 alpha.
Second, with
Okay,
a
who was the motion maker? Okay, Mayor Kampf and Supervisor Parker.
just with a clarifying, just to say that this, by accepting the recommendations for the text corrections, all of this is going to go into a draft, which will come to the board for approval. So it's a step in that direction, but it's not a final action of any kind.
Very good point. Not only will the committee have a chance to look at, you'll all have a chance to look at it one last time before you make a final approval on that document. Okay. Any other discussion? Yes, Bill.
I'd like to just add a voice of admiration to the work the committee's done, and obviously supported by staff with a lot of grueling, tedious detail, but the essential process of getting us there with conviction that we're doing the right thing at this phase of the process. I'd also like to ask if the 5 points that you read off related to Category 4 could be shared with us. A couple of those, I've got the how is that going to happen question in my mind as probably part of the challenge. For example, how do we focus on blight and where does money come from, and so on. So I'd love to learn more about that. Thank you.
Not only are you questioning that, I think every member of the subcommittee is questioning it. We have the same questions you do. So yes, we will provide the information to you, Bill. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion and second on the floor. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Again, thank you very much. Appreciate your help on that. And I would also like to thank Darren for all his work on, he spent many, many hours doing the committee's bidding, and also Scott McCreary was our consultant that worked very, very hard on that. It's a labor of love, really. Okay, next we have the Capital Improvement Program Review Phase 2 study. Michael?
Yes, we may not need. Chair Edelin, members of the board, there are two items for the capital program review under the Phase 2 study. First is receiving a report on the fee calculation that has been accomplished by economic planning systems, and second, to consider a resolution that would implement a special tax base-wide fee adjustment. This is an item that's been before the board, I think, now 3 times. This is the 3rd time. Last month when it came, the board gave us some rather specific direction to give a bit more detail and focus about this, and David Zender will immediately come to the podium and provide a PowerPoint presentation for the board's edification.
Good afternoon, Chair Edelin, members of the board. Nice to be before this august group again, and today I'm going to take you through the results of our Phase 2 study. Before I get into that, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Ellen Martin. Ellen is our Vice President, and Ellen has worked with me intensively throughout to crunch the numbers and to participate in all of our discussions, and she's done a great job. So today I'm going to take you through the rationale for the Phase 2 work, some of the processes that we undertook just in review. We'll talk a little bit about the formulaic approach and what that means, and what it's intended to accomplish. Issues and areas of analysis that we really focused on to bring this to fruition. And then a little bit about next steps and ongoing work as we conclude, and then we'll be in question and answer mode. So just a bit of review on the Phase 2 study. As we've gone through this process, you can see the different rationale for doing this Phase 2 work. One is to fully really account for all of the variables that impact CFD funding on Fort Ord. It's imperative to maintain infrastructure financing stability over the long term. It's having some predictability in the process and some certainty is imperative for investment interests, but it's also very important for the jurisdictions. And we all need to be sure that we're able to take care of our responsibilities to meet the CEQA requirements and take care of all the infrastructure and other requirements that are absolutely imperative to conducting development and habitat protection and other essential duties here on Fort Ord. One of the things that we've really worked on is the notion of financing certainty or the reduction of uncertainty. And there are a number of variables that have jumped onto our plate in terms of having to address them and to be sure that we're anticipating possible implications. One is the FORA sunset, as we're all aware. 2020 is the key date at this stage. We have to take that into consideration when we're thinking about all the different funding sources that come into play, whether they're land sales, property tax, and other aspects of this that are affected by that FORA sunset. Habitat endowment cost is also critically important, and not to mention all aspects of funding the CIP, including TAMC's responsibilities on the base. This all comports to an implementation agreement amendment, and there are really 2 aspects here that are very important as far as conditioning development. First is we just have to have a consistent and predictable approach for FORA, its member jurisdictions, the development community, and the citizens. And then we also have to be sure that we are allowing for the sharing of property tax to the land use jurisdictions as that property tax comes into FORA so that they can take care of some of their responsibilities in terms of maintenance and whatnot. So the formulaic approach was designed with this certainty and predictability in mind. The purpose is really to help calibrate the existing financing tools that are in play, to define a transparent and predictable process as we move forward, and to be sure that we're being fair and equitable and fiscally prudent as we think about jurisdictional risk as well as the cost applying to developers. This is very small print, but I'll just walk through. This is just a review for you. You've seen this slide before. And this highlights the CIP review process as defined by the formulaic approach. So the first step one, is really to total up the capital improvement plan costs. In step two, we look at all the funding sources. And it's important to note that these funding sources, when we total them up, we do net out ongoing costs such as FORA operational costs. And that is in the formulaic approach that comes into play when we look at land sale revenue. And so as we've applied this, land sale revenue nets out ongoing FORA operational costs that are necessary to maintain ongoing operations. Step three is to basically net out the available funds from the total CIP, which leads to a requirement amount of CFD revenue. And then we calibrate the CFD rate to deliver that amount of revenue. So in a nutshell, that's what we're looking at, and that's what we've done. A couple of notes before I show the results of our phase two work. The first is that one of the major changes that we've made in the last 4 to 6 weeks is we've adjusted the land sale revenues. Previously, we were using a residual land value approach that estimated land sale revenues as a percentage of total asset value. That is an industry standard approach and works in most cases. For a number of reasons, these typical industry standard rules of thumb break down a bit when we look at FORA. And there are a number of reasons for this, but we all know that FORA is a bit more complicated, has a bit more risk, and for these reasons there is a little bit of a disconnect between what we typically see in the world of land economics and what the land sale amounts have been here to date on FORA. So as we were looking at our projected land sale revenues, we determined that we were coming in a bit high, frankly, in terms of projected revenue, and there was really no connection between those projected revenues and what's been received in the past. And any time that we see a disruption between empirical evidence and what we're projecting based on this residual land value methodology, we have to take that seriously and reconsider what we're looking at. So what we've done is we have extrapolated from all of the transactions that have occurred in the past, and we've used these transactional data points as a basis for informing us going forward. And so we have adjusted the land sale projection downward by approximately $20 million. And we've had a number of detailed discussions with the development community as well as other members of the public, mainly in the form of discussions at the administrative committee. And it is our understanding that the development community has reviewed this adjustment and agrees with the adjustment. So we feel that this is prudent and leads to a more defendable and appropriate fee level. The second major fundamental sort of foundational piece here is the notion of using the jurisdictional forecasts that have been submitted to FORA. So our current jurisdictional forecasts are the basis for this calculation. And that is the intent of the formulaic approach as we understand it. And what that means in practical terms is that the development that's being looked at occurs in exactly the same period as all of the capital improvements that are being considered. And that's a very important aspect of the formulaic approach. You have to have an apples and apples comparison using a development projection that relates exactly to the capital improvement projection, and therefore you have a sound basis, an apples and apples basis, for computing the one-time CFD tax. One of the aspects, another aspect that has come to light and has caused a number of good stimulating discussions is the notion of FORA operational expenditures. And I did mention that when we look at land sales, we do net out operational expenditures. And so we've gone to great lengths to make sure that that these operational expenditures are justified. FORA has provided backup data to the administrative committee at the meeting a week and a half ago. And FORA has also offered to spend as much time as necessary with the development community or public stakeholders to really understand all aspects of these operational costs. And so we feel that FORA has done a really good job of laying out the basis for this and then offering to clarify any questions that may come up. And I think that's a very healthy process. So as we go into the results, what we've arrived at through this series of calculations is a recommended 23.6 reduction in the existing one-time CFD special tax. As you can see, and we'll just look at the new residential line item just as an example. The existing rate is $34,610. And based on our 23.6% recommended reduction, that would take us to a new one-time CFD special tax of $26,440. And you can see the other land uses also being brought down by the same percentage rate. We feel that this is a justified rate that is a balanced approach. It brings the cost of developing on Fort Ord down such that it should greatly facilitate investment and progress on the projects that you have before you. And we think it's also prudent from a jurisdictional standpoint in terms of being balanced and appropriate, retaining some contingencies, for example, in the habitat realm, to ensure that some of the unanswered questions that we still have, there are some open-ended questions, are addressed at this point. We don't want to be too aggressive, and we don't want to be too meek. And so we feel that we've driven this right down the middle, and that this is an equitable and responsible level of adjustment, and we can stand behind it. So with that, I'll take you through a few notes in terms of the background applying to this analysis. I've mentioned the formula applying the currently adopted CIP build-out schedule. We did look very carefully at the implications of the reassessment study, and I think the notion of potentially slower development occurring over time on Fort Ord needs to be looked at as we go forward. And the key, as I mentioned, is so in 2013-14, this will be a really key topic. And the key, as far as this topic goes, is making sure that we're calibrating the CIP improvements to this modified development program. So again, it's always important to have apples and apples so that you're not burdening limited development with too many capital improvements or have other imbalances that would skew the fee. We've also looked very carefully at property tax revenues. Real estate values are predicated on historical development sales, and these are the sales that are occurring after July 1st, 2012. We have coordinated with the county staff to ensure that we've got their backing in terms of how we're handling this, and we feel that these are solid revenue projections for the property tax. In terms of land sales, I've spoken a bit about this already, so I won't repeat myself. But just in terms of key elements here, the land sale projection evaluates land that's eligible for private ownership, and the transaction values are based on Fort Ord transactions to date. And as I've mentioned, future revenues are offset by caretaker costs, FORA operational costs, and petitions and other relevant legal exposure. Petitions in particular are very expensive, and I'm sure FORA staff will tell you a little bit more about that, but it's our understanding that a petition can cost FORA something in the neighborhood of $500,000. So these are costs that are real and that have to be addressed, and so we need to build these into the expected revenue. The Habitat Conservation Plan is also an area of key importance. In this case, we have done a very concerted and detailed analysis, but yet we do not know exactly what some of the regulatory feedback on the HCP will look like. So, for example, the payout rate of 4.5% right now is a good estimate, but we're waiting for feedback, and that feedback will be coming in the next year. And so this, again, is another example of a 13-14 data point that will need to be perhaps reconciled if it's different than the 4.5%. And for the time being, it's important to retain some level of contingency in case the payout rate is lower. And so we've looked at differential payout rates and thought carefully about the required contingency. And so we feel that with what we have in the equation at this point, we've again addressed this in a reasonable way. So this just gives you a little more mind-numbing detail in terms of the remaining capital improvement program costs, and you can see that subtotal CIP expenditures come out to roughly $238.9 million. You can see that there's below the 238, there's also a Preston Park loan repayment that needs to be factored in, and then also a repayment to the development fee account from land sale from Preston Park, and that is a $7.6 million item. I would mention that the $7.6 million is being credited against the FORA operational costs, and nearly accounts for all of the FORA operational costs that we're projecting through 2020. There is 1 year, the $7.6 million covers costs through about 2019, and then there's 1 year of costs at just over $1 million at that stage that would be included, net of the Preston Park offsetting revenue. So total expenditures come in at $264.7 million. Here you can see the estimated sources of funds, and one of the key differences, if you go back and compare this table to one of the earlier versions where we had a higher land sale revenue projection, you can see that land sale revenues are now coming in at about $55.7 million, and then you can see the other funds as well contributing to about $78.8 million in total revenues. So when we account for all of the expenditures and look at the maximum that would be required and compare what we need against the max, we can see that the percentage of max is about 76.4, or if you take the flip side of that, we can reduce the fee by 23.6%, bringing us back to that $26,000 per unit figure that I cited earlier. Just a note on next steps and ongoing analysis. I did mention the updated development forecast. Clearly, the reassessment report is now coming into the discussion, and I'm aware that there's going to be many more discussions about the implications of that reassessment report and how it affects Fort Ord, and not just the development side, but the capital improvement side. And so all of that will be taken up next year, as we understand, and I think there will be some discussion later today on that. Also, just thinking about going forward, how do we treat some of these revenue sources that may extend beyond 2020? And that's going to be a key area for discussion. For example, if we're still seeing land sales beyond 2020, or still seeing other development coming in at that stage, we need to account for that. And that's going to be a part of ongoing evaluation into the next fiscal year. So you can see also I mentioned the Habitat Conservation Plan with approval expected in 2014. So the update schedule in terms of where we are, we've completed the Phase 2 analysis and brought you this recommendation. Going into next year in 2013-14, you can see there's a need to update the development forecast and the CIP. That would result in a recalibration of the one-time special tax. And then moving into 15-16, that pattern could repeat itself, and then ongoing we would be indexing the fee according to Engineering News Record or some other index that just reflects cost escalation to the capital improvements. And there are always special cases or circumstances, as we're aware of, that may jump into the fray and cause us to, again, evaluate those as they come up. So that completes my presentation, and I'll take any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Any questions by board members?
To the chair.
Jerry, you want to get the lights, please?
To the chair.
Yes. Ralph.
Yeah, thank you for that that presentation, Mr. Zander. Very, very complete. But I do have some questions in regards to, I guess, conceptually what we're doing. We're talking about development and encouraging development. We're talking about removing blight. But we're lowering the land use, the land value. And that will cause a lowering of the property tax by virtue of the property sale?
No, we actually, there's two things going on. The property tax is generated by the total assessed value of the projects. So the total assessed value, say you have a house that's $400,000 total value. The property tax is generated off that finished value. The land sale, with our initial approach, we had a ratio of land value to that 400,000. And when we looked at empirical evidence, it said that, hey, we're coming in a little high here, that things aren't working here the same way they work out there in other parts of California or the U.S. And so it's just the land sale piece that's been adjusted. The property tax piece is still intact.
Okay, so, well, what I'm getting to is the land value in regards to the removal of blight and where the removal of blight is in the CIP. I don't see any talk about building removal. Where does that come in this equation? How does that removal of those buildings come in so that we can increase that development? We know right now it's a hindrance to that development. Mm-hmm. And would increase the land values. So how is that addressed specifically for, like in Seaside, we have those hammerheads up there, which are very expensive to remove.
Sure. So the land sale projection nets out these costs of demolition or deconstruction, blight removal, and certainly those actions help to create the value that we're projecting. Without that step, obviously, we would be not realizing this level of revenue. So it is treated, it is a key assumption in this analysis, and it comes out of land value as a net.
So what you're saying is that the land value is going to pay for the removal?
Correct. So you generate...
So it's not included as a part of the CIP program.
It's one is, so the land value is a revenue source, and then the building removal is a cost, and it is included.
Other questions by board members? Jane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think you said that these projections are based on the current forecast by jurisdictions of when things are going to happen. Mm-hmm. I wonder, to sort of understand this, we haven't gotten to the CIP yet, but one of the handouts that we got, Appendix B, talks about the revenue that will come from the Community Facilities District based on different uses. So, for instance, in next fiscal year, there are some amounts. So, for instance, the Dunes on Monterey Bay projects nearly $3 million of revenue that would be coming in. I guess I have two questions about this. That would be, would that be at the new fee rate? And second piece of that is, regardless of what the fee is, how many units does that represent?
When we get to that item on the agenda, we can explain that in further detail, but just to give you a quick answer, that entails the assumption that the 108 units from the South County Housing Project will be built in fiscal year 13-14 and is based on the proposed fee adjustment today.
Great. And so we can sort of take that formula and apply it to the other numbers that are in there. That's great. Thank you. And then, we, in our packet today, we have some tables from the study, but can we get a copy of the study itself? I mean, I don't.
Yes.
I don't think we've seen that yet.
Absolutely, yes. It's in the works. We have a narrative that's coming together that takes you through all the mind-numbing detail that you'll
that we
enjoy
seek
digging
here.
into.
Yeah, right. Great. Yep. And then just another kind of more general question. I think it was as maybe part of your report or somewhere that even the more conservative projections that I think show up in Table A2, A1 or A2, yes, A1. We have Table A1 sort of right across the page from A2, which is, so A1 is the more conservative forecast, and then A2 has what the jurisdictions are
Right.
projecting.
Right.
Didn't you say, or someone say, that even to achieve the more conservative growth rates, that would really be dependent on the jurisdiction sort of getting together and really working out who's going to do what when, so that it's you're really maximizing your ability to move forward on things?
I think, yes, in terms of maximizing the outcome, that kind of coordination would always be a very good idea. You want to avoid head-on competition and the notion of a zero-sum game that could come out of that. The real important thing as far as the formulaic approach is that you're comparing, as I mentioned, apples and apples. And so in what we've done here is accepted what might be considered a somewhat compressed development schedule, with the idea that that's appropriate in this case because the capital improvement program is also fully scoped. And so it's sort of, you've got a one-to-one comparison there. And there may be some nuances that come out as that approach is refined going forward, so that perhaps the exact absorption rates and amounts of development may change, and then there will need to be a look at the CIP to see if that should be tailored to those new expectations.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Ian.
I thank the chair. Thank you for your study. And I was just to piggyback on what Supervisor Parker just said, that the community's land use jurisdictions should try to work together to make sure we coordinate some of this development. You said something earlier about I'll say it clearly. You mentioned you about development, period. If there's no development, there's nothing for this land use jurisdiction to work on.
That's true.
Okay, so what I'm getting to, if there's no development or less development, then these numbers tend to fall down. So can we turn back to your slide number 8? Come back. And I'm just trying to bring some more transparency for my constituents in Seaside, and it may apply to Marina as the same, but I'll allow their representatives to speak for them. But one of the, as you look at the future revenues offset by obligations, the little bit of money that FORA has to come in that goes towards caretakers' costs or blight removal is eaten up in lawyers' fees, petition fees, and things of that nature that really we have to spend because it comes our way.
That's true.
I understand already that FORA is going to, sitting on the finance committee of FORA, that we're going to try to push off the caretaker fees onto the land use jurisdictions. And that comes out of their general fund. So I'm trying to get to is the other side of the coin is if we don't have development, then this part about blight removal falls to the general fund of each land use jurisdictions. Now, we have some members of this board that don't have any land on Fort Ord, the former Fort Ord, so their constituents don't have to fight or determine $500,000 to take down a hammerhead. Now, for Seaside, we have close to $10 million worth of blight. And it's hard to ask a developer to use half a million dollars to tear down a piece of blight while they're sitting next to another hammerhead that needs to be torn down. So I just, what did your analysis come up with about trying to get out of that?
Well, I think you're putting a very good point on the table here, which is all the jurisdictions are in this together. And if we think about at the very minimum, all of the CEQA obligations have to be addressed. That means you have to have a viable HCP in place, just another thing to think about. And if you don't have the requisite development, then you're not going to be able to meet these obligations. And it is interesting in that if you have a lot less development, that doesn't remove your obligations in terms of addressing the HCP, for example. So it is important to make sure that we do have a one-time special tax that is of an amount that facilitates investment and allows people to move forward equitably. And as you mentioned, it has to be spread across the entire base, or the incidence could be too high in any one jurisdiction. So it's really it's a base-wide concept. It is imperative that everybody participate. And sometimes certain jurisdictions may have higher costs than others, but overall it should balance out for everybody.
Would you say, not a base-wide, but a regional-wide issue, the development of the former Fort Ord? I mean,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Most definitely. And some of the items in your CIP actually have regional benefit as well in terms of some of the road segments. Those are not just used by Fort Ord citizens and employees, but also serve the larger region. And there is an equitable apportionment from TAMC to Fort Ord to try to make sure that Fort Ord is just paying its fair share there. But that's something to keep your eye on as well.
To be a little bit more transparent, is what you're saying is if we use our money to provide better roads and the circulation on the former Fort Ord, that would take off, ease up the traffic on Highway 1 and 68 to and from Carmel, Monterey, PG, and Salinas and South County and other places.
Exactly right.
Okay. Could you give me the number for the HCP again? What's the total?
Yes. Bring you to that. So the HCP endowment and contingency is 36.3 million, plus 18.8 million.
Plus 18. Okay, so that's 52?
Yes.
Okay, just I'm a little bad at math, but I'm checking. 50. Told you I was bad. So
What's $2 million?
54 million. And what I'm getting to is, if you said that's still our obligation, that's still our obligation. When I say our, I'm talking about taxpayers. And if we don't have the type of development that would pay for this, and FORA goes away in 6 years, 2020, that falls to who?
Well, that would fall to the jurisdictions if you want to have development on Fort Ord.
Well, what I'm saying, if there's no development, we still have the HCP plan we had to fund. Mm-hmm. If there's no development, you still have to fund it. So the 54 million falls to who to pay for?
Well, it's essentially insolvent. If you don't have development, I'm not sure where that money is going to come from.
And I just stopped you right there because I think I want the taxpayers in my community to figure out, when you say you're not sure where it's going to come from, mm-hmm. I'm saying by that time it may have to come from them.
It very well could be the case.
That's right.
A very good question.
But that's not on the table. We assume that it's going to come from FORA.
That's correct.
And FORA is them.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions by board members?
Yes, if I may,
Frank.
could you pull up slide, I think it's number 9, detailed results, CIP, and other costs?
That's right, we just had that. There we are.
Thank you. If you go down to where it says other costs, CFD administration. I'm just going to try to refresh my memory, but on April 12th, that amount was $1 million. Then on April 24th, 12 days later, to the Finance Committee, I believe, it was $3,040,000. And now it's $2,240,000. Why in such a short period of time do we have such a fluctuation?
So the $3 million was actually incorrect. That number should have never been.
Was the $1 million incorrect?
Never seen the light of day. So that was just a data input error, plain and simple. It was based on a misinterpretation of some information that we received, and so when we saw that and reviewed the information, we quickly corrected that and brought it back down to the appropriate amount of $2.24 million. Now that number went up because in some detailed discussions with FORA staff, we understand that they have allocated, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but 2 staff persons to the CFD administration, plus any additional cost of consulting or other outside advisory services. So that is essentially what takes you to that number. I believe it's something on the order of $250,000 in terms of staff costs per year, and that is an allocation of staff. It's done as part of the FORA operational plan. And what the key is that those costs, when they're moved over to the CFD, are netted out of whatever category they used to be in. So our understanding is that there's a netting out of the other category of costs where those originated previously. So there's been, to my understanding, no net increase, just a recalibration or evaluation of the different categories of FORA operational costs in terms of which column those costs go into. So I'll appeal to FORA staff if I've generalized too much about that, or if there's any other detail you want to provide.
David, I think you accurately reflected this, but I do want to remind the board members that the version that went to the Finance Committee did not go to the board and only went to the Finance Committee as a way to describe for the Finance Committee the methodology that was used in getting to this, and that's the reason why it was not further distributed. We brought that draft to the Finance Committee solely for the purpose. We described it for the Finance Committee as just to go detailed how the process of doing the formulaic approach was derived, and not as numbers that we were going to take forward to the board at all. It was simply for that purpose, so that interim number was never offered to anyone other than the Finance Committee for that demonstration purpose.
I'll let the members of the Finance Committee address that question. I'm not in the Finance Committee, but on that same page, if you go down a little bit further below subtotal CIP expenditures, the developer fee repayment of $7,600,000. Well, on April 12th, that number didn't exist, period. Right. On April 24th, it became part of it, and it stays there. I reviewed the Amendment 1 to the implementation agreement, and I don't see any justification for this item being listed. In fact, being the representative for the City of Marine, I don't see Preston Park being in something should be listed either, but I'm not going to go there on that. But have you been able to check to justify this amount being placed on this particular document?
Yes. This was a very important thing. It is complicated in terms of how the money moved, and so we spent a lot of time.
Excuse me, let me stop you 1 second. Where did it move from and to?
Well, I'll let FORA staff describe exactly what the process was there in detail if you would like. But basically, my understanding is that there was a bank loan that was made to improve Preston Park, and when the sale of Preston Park occurred, that bank loan needed to be repaid, and that's the $18.2 million.
Well, Preston Park hasn't been sold.
But it's expected to be sold. So when
okay, we won't go there, but go ahead. Sure.
So that number, so it's, we're dealing here with projections, and so I think it is an expectation that Preston Park will be sold, and when it is, that bank loan will need to be repaid. In addition, there was basically a loan made against the land sale revenue account, in order to assist with the improvement of Preston Park. And that money needs to be paid back to the land sale account. And so we wanted to be absolutely clear, and in this, so with this table, we've changed it to make it absolutely transparent about how those monies are coming into the equation. Previously, those monies were not called out like we've shown here. And so we felt it was important to call out these line items and show them explicitly so that you could see exactly the amounts that are being factored in and where they're coming from and why.
Thank you. Could you go on to the next slide? I think it's page 10. Okay, on page 10, you've got land sales revenues, which you referred to, and I think Board Member Rubio referenced briefly, but on April 12th, this amount was $77.4 million. The Finance Committee on April 24th received a draft, which we've received throughout this, of $45.7 million. And now we're at 55.7. In a 2-week period, it's fluctuated, so it's now down below about 22 million what it was before. What was the source of the information, and who did you get it from that justifies, in your mind, reducing this amount by that amount?
This is part of the methodological change that I described in my presentation, where initially, so we had a much higher number that was based on a residual land value approach. That number didn't comport to historical experience here on Fort Ord. So we felt it was prudent to take another look at that and make sure that we weren't coming in too high. The 45 that you saw at the Finance Committee, as Michael has mentioned, that was an interim, in-progress number, still yet to be finalized for purposes of board presentation. So honestly, the 45 versus the 55, it may be just a case of we had not completed all of the facets of our update at that stage.
Okay. And I just have one more question. On the same page where it says FORA property tax revenues, on April 12th, it was 14.5 million. 24th, it was 15 million, and now it's 15,760,000.
Yes.
Again, how do you justify that?
We adjusted. We looked at our single-family residential assessed value assumption from our previous numbers and felt that we were being a little bit too conservative. It was 375,000, as I recall, and so we bumped that up to $400,000, and that increase in assessed value had a small impact on the amount of property tax revenue received.
Okay. And then again, just one, I'm sorry, but assuming that, we'll just take, for example, the Preston Park litigation is settled one way or the other, we would have to go back at that time or shortly thereafter and revisit the CIP and see whether or not it's going to change or modify the percentage in any way?
Yeah, our crystal ball is pretty good, but we can't foresee everything, and so it may be that there are things that transpire that are slightly different than what we're projecting here. And so if that's the case, then the next time through, that number would be trued up.
And is it your understanding, for example, if that particular case were to settle, say, in August of this year, that we could revisit it at that time?
I think it would be part of the overall 13-14 revision.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anytime. Any other questions by board members? Yes, Gail?
Thank you. I would reiterate what Frank's concerns are, is that every reiteration of this has had a different number series inserted. And it's very difficult to follow as a board member. I cannot even imagine what the public is thinking. But it's difficult. The board enacted a formulaic approach. And so to us, as board members, that should just be a math problem, and you're plugging numbers into the math problem. What you have just identified is that you have now adjusted the methodology, and none of us know why the methodology is being adjusted or the factors being considered when the methodology, because that's how you're indicating to us that you got new numbers between April 12th, I do sit on the Finance Committee,
sure,
and today.
Mm-hmm.
And as a responsible voter, I'm trying to understand, is the methodology now that's being changed fair, reasonable to the public, the developer, all of our jurisdictions, and we're trying to follow very consistently here. One thing that you've attached for us is absorption rates that one came from the study EMS did in the reassessment. You're saying you're adjusting the land sale revenues. Projected land sale revenues were too high. My understanding in the formulaic approach is we were accepting what the cities were representing as what is going to be coming from land sales. Am I incorrect?
Yes, just a correction there, which is we're accepting their jurisdictional projections, but the land sale revenue is being projected as part of our economic analysis.
Okay.
And that is the big move. So if you want to think about what's changed in this analysis versus previous, the land sale is the big move here. And the development community, I just spoke with our consultant yesterday, and he indicated that they feel that this is a reasonable adjustment. So I do understand it can be difficult to keep track of. You see all these numbers and they move around. But we do honor the formulaic approach. We want to make sure that we're doing this in a manner fully consistent with the formulaic approach. There are some methodological elements underneath the formulaic approach that have to do with economic theory and economic analysis. And in good conscience, we couldn't take forward the higher number because we just didn't feel it was supported by empirical evidence. We felt there needed to be sort of a connection between what's happened in the past and what we expect to happen in the future.
Okay, so I just have one more question. The apples to apples, you've explained apples to apples. I understand that concept. Can you give us a time you're trying to, in any particular year, that these apples need to compare to these apples? Can you just take us through one example?
Well, just to be clear, what I'm saying in that case is that if we're looking at capital improvements that apply to all of the projected development on Fort Ord, then we need to look at all of the development that's driving those capital improvements. So it really applies to the entire set of development that's projected and the entire set of capital improvements. And as I mentioned, if going forward, if there's an adjustment to that growth rate for development, then it's prudent to look at that CIP to see, if maybe that should be tailored accordingly to be adjusted along with it.
Okay.
Other questions by board members? Yes, Bill.
I was actually feeling comfortable in moving ahead, but Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell has almost convinced me that we're not ready to do it yet, and yet I thought he was absolutely the person who most wanted to get this done. But now I do have a question about the apples-to-apples time frames. What is the time frame that we're looking at for the entire CIP? What apple are we looking at for the CIP?
Through the lifetime of FORA. So the 2020, everything is done by 2020.
All right, so that means on the other side, and that's the expense side, on the revenues.
Both. Except, I'm sorry, I'll let you finish your question and then I'll answer.
Yeah, because what I'm thinking is you're saying then that the entire absorption rate will be complete in 6 years, and yet the evidence is very much different from that. In fact, the reassessment said we ought to be thinking of a 40-year time horizon rather than the 7-year time horizon we're talking about, 6.5, whatever it is.
Yeah. See,
for the capital improvement plan.
Yes. The difficulty comes in with if you're going to, for example, if you adopted our market analysis and you said it's going to occur exactly as was projected in the reassessment report, you would have to go through a very exhaustive process of going through the CIP, of doing your regional traffic modeling with TAMC and AMBAG, adjusting those numbers, and looking comprehensively at the entire CIP to make sure that it comported with the development timeline through 2020. Because where things get more confusing is after 2020, We don't know for sure what the property tax collection regime looks like, and there are other issues of similar complexity. So what we're saying is the letter of the formulaic approach, which we're honoring here, says look at this in terms of build-out scenario or comparable scenario. So you can't have a sort of a mismatch or a disconnect between the CIP improvements and the development assumptions. And so in discussion with the administrative committee, and we've discussed this at length with a number of public and private stakeholders, the consensus is that the formulaic approach supports what we're doing in this methodology in terms of accepting the growth through 2020 and then accepting the capital improvements also through 2020. In reality, it may be that both of those extend beyond 2020, and there would be offsetting adjustments. This is the way that we can get to a reliable number that's fair in this shorter time frame. Then during the 2013-14 process, there will need to be another look at that, and it may result in a slightly different fee, it may not. We'll have to look at it.
So if I might, through the chair, the lingering question in my mind is always materiality. If we're compressing everything into the 6 years that we have versus spreading both plans out over 40 years, which might actually be part of it, with a different regime for how things are done after the sunset of FORA, how much difference would that actually make in the impact fee that we're adjustments that we're making today? Would that be a radically different adjustment, or would it be in the same ballpark as what we're suggesting? And I've heard two versions of that.
So I think, and again, I am now speculating officially. I don't think we would be seeing radical adjustments. I think, and that's also, could be by design. You may want to avoid a radical change from 1 year to the next, and generally, it's a good idea not to have, extreme fluctuations in these costs, because that doesn't really help anybody to have that. So I think it'll be a carefully done analysis that seeks to continue a predictable environment, but does true up some of these outstanding questions as we learn more about what the post-FORA environment might look like. And my expectation would be it would be an evolution in this fee, but not a wild change, not an extreme change.
Thank you.
Bill, let's average over 7 years, not 6. Minor correction. Joe, you're next.
Well, if you go back to slide 9 for a minute. I've heard some conversation from the board about the Preston Park $18,200,000. So in 2020, if that's still sitting there, what happens? Do we just write it off? Do we just walk away from it? I figure we'll probably have that much in legal fees by the time we get there. From the city of Marina, of course. So
Yeah,
I just want to know what happens with that money. Because I know it's on the budget, and I'm going to ask the question down the road. So
Sure. If that needs to disappear from the budget, then that's an adjustment that would be made at the time that it was deemed unlikely or appropriate.
thanks.
Okay, Ralph, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for allowing me to ask another question. And this is in regards to, again, we're squeezing down these numbers to encourage development. But it's also, you said we don't know what's going to happen after 2020. I do. The jurisdictions are going to be left holding the bag is what's going to happen. And that's very clear. Because when we lower these numbers, less things are going to be taken off the table by this board and through this regional impact fees and whatever. So has it ever occurred to anyone, I'm sure someone's thought about it, but if, let's say we squeeze everything down, we get this development started, and lo and behold, we have another, roaring economy. And, our developers, really capitalize, and there's a huge windfall. I think this may have happened before in recent history here at Fort Ord. Is there any way that FORA can be a participation agreement with the developers in consideration for the moves we're making now, that should there be a windfall, that we can recoup some of those funds so we can finish the things that we want to do, like building removal. I don't know if that's being considered or not, but it's something I would like to see explored.
This is the real intent of the formulaic approach, is to make it more certain about what happens if good things happen. For example, if you do see the type of economic recovery, and we all hope that we do have that, then you're going to see higher assessed values, for example. And those higher assessed values will deliver higher amounts of property tax. And that will be money that you can use to help offset some of your maintenance expenditures and so forth. So there would be benefits to you coming from these improvements in the economy.
Yeah, I understand that. That's on a going forward basis, but the project that gets entitled and goes forward based on the numbers today, at the end of that project, when they get that big windfall, how do we get that? How do we get that portion that we missed out on?
With the windfall, that would be, for example, let's say that a given project is going very well and the pricing is increasing overall. That means basically that you're going to readjust in the future all of the variables that we're talking about according to the formulaic approach. What the formulaic approach seeks to accomplish is a predictable and certain environment. We have maintained that within this formulaic approach, it is important to think about contingent events, such as the HCP payout rate is a good example. If that doesn't come out at 4.5% and it comes out at 3%, then that has major implications. And we've buffered this appropriately to make sure that we're anticipating those types of possible eventualities. I don't think there really is a major issue of windfall and wipeout here. I think that the formulaic approach basically says that we're solving for exactly that much money that's needed to fund the improvements that we've identified here going forward. If we don't need all these improvements, or the cost of these improvements goes down, or we're able to generate more land value or more property tax revenue than we're projecting because of improving economy, then there's a ripple effect through the fee calculation, and there's a readjustment. But it's always calibrated to pay only that which is needed to fill the gap between what the expenses are and what the projected revenues are. And those projected revenues are going to be continually updated, as are the expenses. So everything's pretty tight. I think that there isn't, I don't foresee that there's going to be gross inequities or windfalls of the nature that we're discussing.
Any other questions by board members? Yes, Gail?
So when you went through this, and again, I'm trying to understand how we went from a 35.6% reduction in what was presented to us in April to a 23.6. That's a 12% swing. So, and because these numbers go in and out, now we're really trying to understand why numbers go in, or so that's, bear with me. But the major adjustment, you mentioned three major factors that in your explanation when you were on this page of why this changed to this reduction. One was the major adjusted land sale revenues. Projected land sale revenues were too high, so you reconsidered and looked historically and reduced the land sales by $20 million. I want to know historically, meaning the last 3 years, the last 5 years? That's one question. How did you decide it was 20 million? What was your historical data upon which you were looking? Because I think we need to know that as a factor. And then the FORA operational expenditures was the other big thing, and Frank's already pointed out, those have fluctuated wildly in these different versions. And I understand now the 3 million was a mistake, but they still, even with the 3 million taken out, the current is much higher than it was when the 3 million was in there. So if you could just help me through this.
So in terms of the FORA operational expenditures, as I discussed, there have been the 3 million number was just an interim number. It was presented at the Finance Committee, didn't have standing, and that number is now correct at its 2.24 million. It's important to put that number in perspective in terms of you have a total of 264 million in costs, and we're talking about possible delta here of $500,000 or so. So not give full credence to your comment, because I think it is important to be absolutely transparent and accurate in all these numbers, no question about it. So we believe that the 2.24 million is the right number. Sometimes it takes us a little time to go around.
And I only
talk to
use that
staff.
as an example.
Sure.
I'm not picking on the number.
Sure.
What I'm just trying to say is you took out some erroneously high numbers, but the expenditure column still went up, making that the reduction in the percentage of reduction went from 35% to 23%. I'm trying to understand why and have you articulate for us where these, you've given us in principle, I'm trying to have you tell us why you would reduce by 20 million, not 1 million, not 50 million, but 20 million is just to give us some of why you're justifying a difference of 12%.
Okay. So we looked at all of the transactions that have occurred, every single transaction that has occurred on Fort Ord, and we looked at the each one as a data point, sort of like reviewing comparable sales in an appraisal, and then we averaged all of those, and then we applied that average sale per acre to projected sales going forward. And that's what led to the adjustment.
All that good for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Tom?
So you've used the expression predictability a couple of times and indicated that this process is intended to provide that. But then you've also used the phrase you're going to true up. And we've talked about the uncertainty both on the revenue side as a consequence of how quickly development does or does not occur, and the uncertainty in these costs. So what is predictable about this process?
Well, what's predictable is the method by which the calculation is done. So there is a very clear expression of the revenues that are taken into consideration, what's an allowable revenue, what's not, in terms of operating costs, can those be included in the calculation and so forth. So having just a very clear expression of what is okay to include and what is not okay is very helpful, so that as the board changes, as different things happen out there, we always have this thing that's etched in stone that says this is the formula that governs the calculation. That formula is different than the realities that confront us in terms of actual market activities. And so we right now live in a very interesting time in that we're coming out of this recession. We thought that price points were here. Maybe next year they'll be here, or maybe they'll be here. It is difficult to say exactly where price points are going to go, where land sale amounts are going to go. Those are always subject to analysis, and we do the best we can to look at the trends, to understand the dynamics, and to put the most appropriate assumptions, calculations, and data into that formula.
So this process is a process whose sole purpose is to come up with this one-time CFD tax and do so in a very open, transparent way that is potentially justifiable to the public and to the board. So, given the uncertainties in the pace of future development and given the uncertainties in some of the costs, for instance, those shown there, do you have any recommendations for us as to how we might, going forward, try and deal with those uncertainties? Because past evidence would seem to say we're not going to build out close to 6,000 or 7,200 homes in the next 6 years.
I think there's two fundamental things. The first is to go through the exercise of thinking about, given the information that we're receiving right now about the recovery and some of the things that were discussed in the reassessment report, sort of synthesizing that information and then doing our best job collectively to present a revised development forecast for 13-14, starting in 13-14. And then also to really take a careful look at the CIP and to ensure that the projects that are in the CIP are serving that volume of development that we can expect to have. And then the second thing is, I think it is important to have further conversation about what really happens after 2020. Some scenario planning, I think, is probably a good idea. And nobody knows for sure what that post-2020 environment looks like. I'll just put it out there, plain and simple. So I think coming to agreement, and this is part of what I believe to be the coming effort in next fiscal year, is to absolutely iron out agreed upon assumptions about how those 2020 revenues are treated.
And if I understand you correctly, you're suggesting that going forward, if the development's slower than you used in modeling this to come up with this fee, we may have to take a look at some of those costs and do belt tightening or sequencing of those things, perhaps postponing some of those expenditures further down the line.
Could very well be.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions by board members? Saying none, let's take this out to the public. Any public comment with regard to item 7C?
Good afternoon. My name is Alan Belinsky. I'm the Housing Development and Property Director for Interim Incorporated. Interim develops and operates affordable housing for very low-income people with psychiatric disabilities. We have 2 projects on FORA right now, and we have a third one in the works. We plan on breaking ground in August of this year. So I want to commend FORA for this formulaic approach. I think this is a good way to go about it. And of course, I'm also happy that some of the special taxes are going down. I represent a different type of developer, being a nonprofit. And I just want to say that as you're considering public policy in terms of affordable housing, that it is becoming harder and harder for affordable housing developers to get the public funds that we were able to get before, and that these fees really do make a difference to our ability to develop affordable housing. We're able to do the project that we are starting in August with the fees at the current rate, but it has been difficult and will get more and more difficult for us to raise money in the future. So I want to thank you for the formulaic approach. I think that's a really good way to go. And just have you be thinking a little bit about affordable housing and public policy in back of that to promote that on forward orders. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Yvonne Stone, Florida Environmental Justice Network.
It's working now.
Okay. Yeah, it's a miracle. The problem is we have too many people in our community telling us what to do. We would have more money if we would stop paying all these contractors to come in here and tell us what to do. And I'm paying money to have somebody to explain something, and I myself, I'm considered a community person. I would not be able to understand what was being done here today and what was really being said here today. We have a university that's being given more and more decisions to make for our community, our health plans, our this, our that, and we are virtually not addressing what needs to be addressed. If we had started addressing the community concerns from the get-go, then we would be at this point where would be addressing these huge projects. Up in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, they are now having projects that are being done by community organizations, not just special ones, and they are addressing the affordable housing situation. What I heard here today is the housing that's being built, market rate, and all of this is not going to address the needs of the community. It's going to further push people out of the communities. It's going to further devastate the folks who are trying to live day by day. And while they're waiting on something to really be done to address our situations, I don't know why our situation is so complicated, more complicated than in other communities that have been hit by some of these same kind of things, base closures and redevelopments and all that. We're going about this thing backwards. I'm just discouraged that we don't have more of a say about what kind of developments and plans that we have coming into our community. And how come some of the funds from those developments are not going to the people in the communities so that they can have business development, job creations, and those kind of things for the people who live here? We're having a whole lot of conversations, and we're going sideways and backwards. We're bringing people in, and people are going out. What is really going on here? That's the bottom line.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Chrisanne Giles. I'm the Executive Director of the Building Industry Association of the Bay Area. I appreciate the opportunity to comment today. I passed around a comment letter that I would like to submit to the public record. Attached to that comment letter is a copy of the Phase 2 analysis that was presented to this board April 12th and a copy of the amended implementation agreement. To date, the FORA staff has presented a wide range of CFD modeling based on varying assumptions and build-out theories. The only CFD formulaic calculation presented to the FORA board that follows the adopted CIP without altering or adding programmatic cost was presented at the April 12th, 2013 board meeting and resulted in a CFD special tax of $22,290 per residential unit. The April board model follows the adopted CIP. It funds the entire build-out of the CIP program and the environmental mitigations while still including substantial financial contingencies. The amended implementation agreement was drafted to include the CIP revenues and update the CFD fee within 90 days of its adoption. The CFD fee calculation was due to be completed last December. The amended language was created to reduce uncertainty and to establish a CFD fee process that was well-defined, predictable, and transparent to all stakeholders. It was a concession to the building community to support the extension of FORA, giving certainty of the CFD fee and inclusion of CIP program revenues, which was absent in the previous process. What should have been an arithmetic exercise based on the adopted CIP has been complicated with changes to the CFD administrative budgets, new land sale methodologies, and multiple build-out hypotheticals, none of which have been adopted by this board or directed by this board, and they should be vetted further as part of next year's CIP adoption cycle, the CIP adoption 2013-2014. It's critical that the formula calculation follow the process outlined in the implementation agreement. Applying the formula consistency will position FORA to take advantage of improving market conditions and fulfill the base-wide redevelopment goals and local job creation objectives. We would urge the FORA board to adopt the April 12th formulaic calculation, resulting in a CFD of $22,290, and direct staff to consistently apply the program revenues, lease, land sale, and property taxes in any future modeling for the formulaic calculation. If the CFD is referenced beyond 2020, the program revenue should also be included. To point out some of the questions that board members O'Connell, Oglesby, and Rubio have commented on, the CFD amount should facilitate investment. You have affordable housing projects ready to go that can benefit from this adjustment and brings jobs locally. It's an amazing opportunity to encourage some really good projects. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other public comment?
Hi, I'm Antonio, a concerned citizen here. Listening to all this. First of all, may I ask, is she representing FORA there? Here, the FORA and all that. And you guys are the council, correct? Answer? Hello?
Sure, it's a public comment, so you have a right to get
I'm sorry,
go
excuse
back
me.
and forth.
Okay. Anyway, so I was, by the way, I was behind, I was in front of her, so she jumped in front of me. Anyway, so I was saying, I was inquiring concerned about the council lady there was inquired about, where the funds are, why there was such an extension of a difference between somewhere, I think April to April sometime, and a concern about that. And then he was trying to explain the individual representing FORA or CIP, whatever it's called, excuse me. And whereabouts, why was there such a different, why such a fluctuation of all the money? And where that money was really going or where it's going, I don't know. And the individual behind me, excuse me, or in front of me, who jumped in front of me, the female, was commenting about supporting this that would bring jobs and bring some kind of, support to it. So I'm just commenting on it and hope it opens some eyes and some hearts and some ears.
Thank you, sir. Next public speaker.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Gene Doherty. I'm a resident of Marina, and and listening to the presentation of this CIP assessment, it looks awfully familiar to me. That this looks familiar as a projection of revenues based on ideal situations. It's based on projections of home sales, land sales, and the word formulaic to me means guesstimate. And I'm just curious, and before you adopt this, that the data that is so. By the way, I've been a real estate appraiser for 40 years, and reviewing data, usually you want to look at those sales and see if they've been adjusted for cash value. Looking at any projected rates, you certainly want to make sure they're market-derived rather than estimated. And also, I do remember seeing this type of project when at the time it was University Villages projection, and getting getting some income based on some projected tax revenue, incremental taxes. And those projections, even though a lot of people like us were saying these projections were way out, they still went ahead and voted that in and then made a commitment to take a lot of basis on a future projection. And those projections are even less now. And I just wonder that if the 23.6% relative to 35 is accurate, because some of these projections, especially on the estimated value, they're showing by 2017 over 1,000 houses are going to be sold, and they're projecting taxes and incomes from those projections. So I would suggest and caution that you take this report with a grain of salt and maybe look at it again and see it's a little, to me, it seems like a little overestimated. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Hello. My name is Scott Hilk. I'm with Marina Community Partners. We're the developer of the dunes on Monterey Bay. And I appreciate the opportunity to comment on the proceedings here today. In addition to my comments, I've submitted for the record a letter that I think has been distributed around the podium. We have been involved with this FORA process of setting fees for the last several years, and we are actually very happy that we're finally at this stage where this fee is ready to be adopted. I know that there was a fee adopted a few years ago. We are happy that we've finally gotten through the process to have a formulaic fee that's calculated based on the CIP numbers that this board approves. So that has been the whole objective of the exercise, is to take out any other factors. So I have a couple specific comments which I've outlined in the letter. I'm not going to go through in too much detail. We've got a couple specific objections, and I think some of the board members have covered them already. In Table 2, there's the CFD administrative costs, and we're just not sure exactly where those numbers are coming from. There's been some discussion about providing additional detail, but at this point there hasn't been additional details provided, and that's a significant number. I mean, that, assuming you spend an equal amount every year, it's over $320,000 a year that you're doing to do this type of study, which should be a formulaic, arithmetic exercise of the CIP numbers that have been adopted. In Table 2, there's a developer fee repayment to land sale value, and although it's described, there hasn't been a public process. This board hasn't adopted those costs and those assumptions. And the last is the land sale revenue, and we actually agree with the methodology. We know that it's a little bit different in terms of what EPS has put together, but we think that it's a reasonable methodology to come up with a value for the land sale. What we don't agree with is that there's costs that are deducted from that land sale revenue value that are not substantiated, and again haven't gone through the board process to be adopted. So we have just received the May study, and these are the initial comments that we had. We do think that there's an adjustment that can be made on an annual basis once the CIP is adopted every year. We think that's the appropriate methodology. We have concerns about the fee calculation and the process. And it's really hard for us to plan development when we don't know what the fees are going to be and whether there's going to be an arbitrary adjustment to that fee process. I want to urge the board to adopt a fee program, and the fee program should be based on the CIP, which was reflected in the April study. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Andy Leaf, South County Housing. Just a few quick points. We're now 8 months past the recorded implementation agreement between the City of Marina and FORA. So I just want to reiterate, I'm here to encourage the board to adopt the fee today. I'd like nothing more than to bring in the check that Supervisor Parker referred to, the nearly $3 million, if the fee is implemented. So again, I just encourage this board to take this action. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other public speakers?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Nancy Amadeo. Can you hear me? Is it on? Okay.
Yes.
This process of the fees, the formulaic approach, was approved in August, and here we are in May, and we're still dealing with this. The City of Marina, you've heard 3 projects, three different entities come up and talk about projects they have: Interim, South County Housing, and the Dunes on Monterey Bay. And they are not moving forward because they don't have a clear idea of what their fees are going to be. Now, I think back on August 12th, and you've heard it mentioned several times, you had an approach that was based on 4 approved dollar actions. I'm at a loss for words right now. And now you have a new program that's been brought forward with added expenses in it that changes the overall result. maybe next year that would work just fine because you may have approved those added expenses, but I don't think it works right now. And I would agree with previous speakers that perhaps it is time to adopt the formulaic approach with the amounts that were included in the April 12th meeting so that communities can move forward and we can actually have the development that communities need in order to prosper. We are all hurting in a big way. And if development doesn't move forward, in order to sustain our communities, we'll have to raise taxes. And I personally do not want to go to my community and say that FORA didn't do its part, and now they as individuals are going to have to make up the difference. Please pass the April 12th today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Next speaker, please.
Mr. Chair, trustees, board members, and staff, Carlos Ramos with C Jobs, Coalition for Jobs, Opportunity, and Business in Seaside. We encourage you to move forward. Anything that you can do to stimulate our third E, the one that's been neglected. In fact, it's not even a capital E. It's a small letter, case letter E. We've got education, we've got the environment, but economic revitalization is extremely important. You've heard enough comments on the formulas and the fact that we're asking you to move forward. But what I'd like to do is to go to the comments that Mayor Pro Tem Oglesby pointed out in the comments that he made, which were extremely important to those of us that will be impacted if nothing is moved forward, if there is no development, if there's no economic opportunity that moves forward. We're going to be burdened with more taxes and more costs without having any revenue whatsoever. Without question. Your comments, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. I hope that the listening audience were able to listen to that, not just in Seaside, but throughout the whole county, because whatever happens in one community impacts the rest of us, especially in the area of economic opportunity. So, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, thank you for that. And obviously, Mr. Mayor Rubio, thank you for both of you being the champions of doing what's right for not only your particular community, our community in Seaside, but what is right for the commitment and the promise made to the community in ensuring that economic revitalization would be a strong pillar, a capital E, not a lowercase e, in terms of what this board, will do. We're depending on your actions. There's an elephant in the room. No, I'll say it, there's an elephant in the county, in the community, and we know what that is. And it says either you don't want people to prosper, probably because they have what they have already, or those of us that are saying, we need more. We need more jobs, we need more opportunities, and we need the prosperity that other people might have. And some of the individuals in the community might be in a situation that they're comfortable. But those revenues that are needed for our communities, specifically Seaside, but those surrounding communities, are in your hands. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment?
Sid Williams, I represent the United Veterans Council. I cannot believe, yesterday on the news, they talked about the groundbreaking out at East Garrison. And the main word they used over and over again on that was, these guys are willing to take the risk. Everybody can't assume the risk. And the risk is not knowing what the heck they're going to have to pay. You guys have been screwing around with this for so long that we're into the second year on it. How can development go forward if you can't provide them a meaningful structure to plan? And we need development. Marina needs development. The veterans need that clinic. So pass your formulaic approach, get some certainty out there, and let's get things moving. If you mess around too long, some of these people will be gone. That will withdraw the number of units that you're going to be basing your formula on, and then how much per unit will it be? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment? Sir, you've already had a chance. Everybody gets a chance just once per item on the agenda. Yes. Any other new members of the public? Seeing none, back to the board. I would entertain a motion.
Yes, if I may, Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion that we received a report that was presented today, that we adopt the April 12, 2013 study, formulaic approach, showing at $22,290. I think that is a, excuse me a moment, CFT special tax required be a 64.4%.
Okay, we have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Frank O'Connell. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, and we have a second by Councilwoman Gail Morton. Any discussion on the motion?
Yes, briefly.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, Bill, I definitely want this to move forward. The reason I brought up the numbers that I did is because I was concerned with the numbers going back and forth. We have, as been stated by the public and is known by the board members, we have a situation that we have a right to revisit this at any time. In fact, if you read the amendment to the implementation agreement, it gives a reference to doing it within the spring of 2014, but it also says, or when an economic or other event causes material change to the CIP cost or revenue assumption. So we could actually come back and visit it at an earlier time than that based on the wording of that document. So what we're trying to do is to basically satisfy the reason for the approach in the beginning is that to provide a definite amount and a definite procedure to follow for the purpose of the developers. We cannot start in August by recording a document that requires 90 days, and here we are about approximately 9 months into it. It just doesn't satisfy what we expected, nor what the developers expected. So I'm simply asking that we pass this and move on. And again, if we have to come back to look at this at a later time at the end of the year or less than a year from now, we'll definitely be looking at it. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion?
Mr.
Ralph?
Yeah, I would move, I would vote for the staff recommendation, which is the adjustment attachment C. But I can't go back to the April 12th. No.
Yes. Are you done? Bill, go ahead.
I think they're still arm wrestling over there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The thing that goes through my mind is that we need to pass either April 12th or April 3rd, or the current one. It's time for us to move on. I agree with that. But the whole discussion reminds me of a definition I once heard, and I asked somebody, what's accounting? And they said, and this was kind of in the context of a large company and pricing and goodness knows what, and it was, accounting is the never-ending search for non-controversial numbers. And then you take a step beyond that in predicting the future, and it even gets worse because there just aren't any non-controversial numbers about the future. And that's kind of what we've got. One of the things that actually I found a little, and to follow up Mr. Moore's comment, predictability and certainty. There is no predictability and certainty about the future. And I think the label is misleading. What we're looking for is procedural integrity. And so I'm going to take a moment, if I might, to philosophize. But the formulaic approach sounds like the formula idea is something new. And then, in fact, a year ago when this came up, I thought it was kind of wacky. But okay, we'll humor ourselves. What I realized is the formula's been there all along, but it's been more of a mystery. And the fact is we've had obligations that we know are coming. We have revenue streams that we know are coming. We looked at the price of impact fees to get us to where we need to go to be able to meet our obligations. And that is the formula that's been there all along. But what we haven't had is the procedural integrity of the numbers. The idea that somehow there's certainty into the future about how much it's going to be is a little bit bewildering to me. I'm not sure that we have the luxury of that, but we certainly should know how we're adding things up, what we're dividing into what, and where all of the numbers come from. My experience in this kind of thing is it takes about a year to work out all the bugs, and my suspicion is it's going to take us a year. And it leads me to believe the one question that's been in my mind, and I think I resolved it, is this absorption rate issue, and does it really matter? And so let me comment on that for a moment. Whether we absorb everything in 6 years, do all the CIP in 6 years, or whether we spread it over 40, and I think I finally figured this out, so please, if I'm wrong, don't tell me, because I'm getting really comfortable with it. It's the same envelope of obligations, it's the same envelope of revenue. It happens, and so the numbers basically balance out. Regardless, there's some tweaks here and there, there's some differential inflation things that might matter, but we get back to the materiality question of how accurate can you get in estimating the future, and I think all those things are relatively small issues. The only question I have, and I tend to lean very much toward the current report, I'm distressed when we have people keep pulling the rug out from under us. The question is, are we obligated to go with numbers that have been previously approved, or as a board can we say, we are the board, we do set the numbers, we believe the numbers in the current report are suitable numbers for making this formulaic computation. I think the CIP is one of the things that we really need to go with the approved CIP, but there are a lot of other things. I'm wondering, from a legal point of view, do we have the latitude to go with the numbers that are in our current package, or are we required to go back to the August 12 package?
John?
April 12 package.
I think you're obligated to use the numbers that are in front of you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So what that leads me to is a concern about going with April 12th.
John,
but I would hope that we have something solid for the current proposal in the package.
We have a motion on the floor that's similar to the staff recommendation, except to use the April 12th numbers and not the numbers in the packet today. Is that legal? Is that motion a legal motion that the board can vote on?
That's up to the board's discretion. It is legal.
It is legal. Other discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Jane.
Thank you. I just want to make clear that I will be voting for this fee, not because I agree with it. You've heard me express my concerns in the past, and I think those concerns are justified. But this is something that has been adopted by the board, and this is something that's come forward as a representation of that policy that the board has adopted. And so for that reason, I will be voting for it.
Thank you, Jane. Any other discussion on the motion?
Question?
Yes.
To the chair, procedural. I guess if this motion doesn't pass, can we use today's numbers?
If this motion does not pass with the majority, then you can reintroduce a motion using today's packet, the staff recommendation, if you want, or any other motion. Okay? I'm going to call for the question. If you would not only just say aye, please raise your hand up so we can get an accurate count on this. All in favor of the motion and the second, signify by saying aye and raise your hand. Aye. We have 1, 2, 3. All opposed, say no and raise your hand.
No.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 6. Okay, the motion fails. I'd entertain a substitute motion.
If I may, I'll make a motion to accept the report presented today, as well as adopt the resolution set forth in attachment C, which sets forth the percentage to be charged. I think it's 76, bear with me a moment, 76.4%.
Frank, thank you very much. We have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Frank O'Connell and a second by Mayor Rubio. Okay, any discussion on that motion? Saying none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Thank you very much. It's unanimous, and Marina can move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we have an issue of basically a hard stop of our proceedings here at 5 o'clock, and have a motion to extend the meeting just a little bit further. It shouldn't take much longer. I apologize for jinxing the proceedings by saying we would be done by 5 o'clock.
I'll make a motion we continue to maximum of 5:30.
Okay, we have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Frank O'Connell and a second by Supervisor Parker. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Oh, another unanimous one. Are we on a love roll here or what? Okay, next we have information item under new business capital improvement program. Michael? Stevens will be briefing that.
Members of the board, no pressure. I'll try and move as quickly as possible. If we could move to the first slide. We are pivoting now to the 2013-14 fiscal year capital improvement program. No action is required tonight. We would be bringing back the item for action at the June meeting, but it does give you an opportunity to ask any questions or give some kind of a signal as to information that you would like to have brought back, questions answered, and so on. This is an iteration of the last 15 years or so of capital improvement program planning, and as I said, it does pivot off the last discussion considerably. But just to go over in total on a $500 million, $500 million program, these are the main costs that we have left in our capital improvement program, and they break into what are mitigations funded by the Community Facilities District into other obligations like building removal that are funded by land sales and other revenues that are not eligible to be paid for by the Community Facilities District. We have a slide for pretty much each of those, and so we're just going to go through those to give you a little bit of a sense for what makes them up. Some of you have gone through this year after year, others are new to it. I should mention that the storm drainage program, which required the removal of 3 outfalls that went into the bay, has been completed. It was about a $7 million project, and that has been completed. And also the fire rolling stock purchase. We purchased $1 million plus of fire equipment in order to be able to combat any wildfire aspects, any wildfires that might take place, and we had donated those vehicles to the adjacent agencies, and we went out and financed that, and the last payment is included there, so we will have retired that obligation by the end of this coming fiscal year. Next slide. The board has essentially a queue of road projects that they've been operating under for a number of years, and as we complete one project, we move up the next item on the queue. A couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago or more, the board had elevated Eastside Parkway funding to a higher priority. So it is currently at the top of the queue. Eastside Parkway connectivity is dependent on completion of some other projects on your CIP, including Intergarrison Road and Eucalyptus and a portion of Giggling Road. The total of those projects taken as a program would be approximately $25 million. The slide says that we're unlikely to collect that $25 million in the 13-14 fiscal year, which I think is an understatement. And we also cannot actually begin the construction until we complete the munitions cleanup work and do the appropriate CEQA, which is anticipated for 2015-16. So what to do for 13-14? The next projects in the queue are the Davis Road Bridge south of Blanco, and there's already a reimbursement agreement with Monterey County in place. And they had requested last year, you might remember, that we advance sufficient funds so that they can meet a local match for a grant. And then also the South Boundary Road project, which is also within grant range at the federal level, very likely candidate for the Federal Department of Commerce EDA grants, and we should be able to generate enough fees to do some kind of a local match similar to what we did for General Jim Moore Road. Next slide. Okay, well, even with my glasses, I wouldn't be able to see this. But basically, we provided you with a series of the spreadsheets that we always give you, and so you have them. I'm not going to go through all of it unless there's something that you want to talk about. But this particular one, I think, is an important one. Also, among the slides that were provided to you, you can see that these are the projects that we have left. And they start with what is called the TAMPC 2005 reallocation study. So all of this is coordinated with the regional agency that does your regional transportation planning. And we've broken up the projects into regional, off-site, and on-site improvements. The regional improvements are almost always performed by somebody else, by Caltrans or TAMPC or someone doing a larger project like a Highway 1 widening or something to that effect, Highway 156 and so on. And FORA is required to come up with a percentage contribution to that project. As we get into the on-site improvements, it's often the case that we're able to actually forward 100% of the funding for a particular project, which under a nexus understanding would make sense because it's right here on Fort Ord. Most of those projects there are currently being processed by either the county or by Marina, and we have a reimbursement agreement in place. But you can see the other projects that I mentioned previously on the last slide also included. Next slide. Just a little bit of history on the water augmentation program, just so that we can be clear, because we had so much fun with the issue last year. This does not include anything to do with the so-called regional desal program. This is the water augmentation program that this board has had in its CIP from inception and is part of the existing base reuse plan. There is a CEQA mitigation that has been forwarded and indexed over time, over the years. And then some years ago, the FORA board approved a contribution to buy down the Marina Coast Water District connection fees in order to protect the ratepayers from a huge increase that would result from a capital project that is having to be covered over a smaller rate base. And that just gives you the history of when that was. And we had been indexing the contribution, but we stopped doing that after the fiscal 11-12 year because of the uncertainties about the water augmentation program and which format it was going to take. So that's pretty much in the hands of the board. We could index, we could stop indexing. It is subject to negotiation in the future. Next slide. Moving to habitat management, these are the numbers as indexed for 13-14. So we talked about it a little bit in the last item. But what you can see here is we've been putting aside, we charge out to ourselves voluntarily 25% of all development fees collected. And we've saved up roughly $5 million so far, building to an endowment of $39.5 million. And then you can see the familiar $19 million contingency regarding the uncertainty as to the payout rate, which we should resolve during this coming fiscal year. That is, of course, subject to negotiations with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the former California Department of Fish and Game, now calling themselves California Department of Fish and Wildlife, just to make it a little bit more confusing for everybody. Ultimately, the HCP endowment of $39 million would produce about $1.7 million per year. So that just gives you a sense for what kind of program it kicks out, and it's supposed to go out at least 40 years, but into perpetuity. Next slide. Now, a little bit about contingencies. We came before this board a couple of years ago, and we were carrying contingencies of $124 million or so, which I think everybody involved agreed were the result of some timidity, and just over the years, everything that came up, we added a contingency. And so one of the reasons we hired EPS to do the phase 1 review was to take a very close look at that, and they came back with a number of those contingencies removed from the program, and that resulted in the previous 27% decrease in the rate. The issue of caretaker costs was brought up in conversation in earlier items tonight. And I should just point out that one of those contingencies that we had always carried was this $12.2 million property management and caretaker costs item, which frankly we were never going to be able to collect. So in the process of fixing these contingencies 2 years ago, you might remember that EPS came up, I thought, was a fairly ingenious approach of targeting land sale revenues. And we actually were asked by the board to go back and to take a look very carefully at what those costs actually are and have been for jurisdictions who were doing some form of caretaker management of properties on the former Fort Ord. And we held a whole series of meetings and so on, as we are wont to do around here. And we came up with an annual cost of $660,000, which is a much better way, I think, of protecting against any heretofore unknown caretaker costs. They would have to be, the jurisdiction, in order to apply for that, of course, would have to demonstrate that they actually have the costs and so on. But that's one way of covering it. Then the other bullets on that slide add up to the contingency number that is on our main slide, and it is I think the result of phase 1 and now phase 2 of just really taking a good solid look at what the real contingencies are, what we have to look at. And so you have the base one of 16.9 million, plus the habitat management, plus an additional kind of specialized form of contingency for utilities and some of the relocation costs that we have run into when we're putting a road in and so forth. And then the loan and principal and interest repayment that was talked about in the last item as well. Principal, $7.6 million, interest making up the balance, which was used in part as a match for General Jim Moore Boulevard. That was a case where land sale revenues were fronting dollars that would have been paid by the CFD if any dollars had been coming in those days. So those are the contingencies. Regarding the building removal program, we have in place two major agreements, memorandum of agreement with both the City of Marina and with Monterey County through a combination of credits to land sales and actual cash dollars, to take care of certain specified amounts of building removal that had been agreed upon by this board many years ago. And so those are retired at this point in time, leaving the obligation of $6.2 million, which we're showing on the cover page. And you can see that it's primarily for the Stockade and for the Surplus 2 area in Seaside. Stockade is in Marina. Next. That might be it says end of slideshow. So we don't have a little cute question mark or anything, but that concludes the overview.
Any questions by board members? And if we get the lights, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have several questions, Steve. Thank you for a very, very good presentation. And in regards to, since that was the last one we're looking at there, the building removal at the surplus two, and it says specific buildings. What specific, are we talking about the hammerheads there?
I would have to bring back sort of very specific answers to questions, but yes, it's those, and not all of them. Some of the so-called public benefit properties were not included,
right?
So that's why we say specific. But hammerheads, for those who don't know, those are the sort of big, huge army barracks with mess halls and such on the ends of them, and they are pretty much impervious to just about anything, I would say. So,
so they were included in the 1213, but they're not included in this one, in this CIP. I don't see that coming in 1415 or 1514.
Well, just in general, the general answer is that we're the same obligation that we've been carrying for building removal has been brought forward into the projected year. So we haven't changed anything from the past.
Okay, so when the funds become available, that will go first.
Correct.
Okay. Second question is in regards to the East Side Parkway. You say you don't have enough money for construction. Have all the pre-construction studies and obligations been done?
No, we have not completed that work because you wouldn't want to advance, for instance, environmental work on a project that you don't have money for and then have that work go stale. We have done some preliminary work and so on in that sense. We don't have an alignment that's been agreed upon yet, but a certain amount of work has been advanced, but not the environmental work that would be necessary to go, for instance, apply for a grant, and certainly not to actually align it and begin a construction project.
Okay, so when we talk about moving those funds to South Boundary Road and Davis Road, are we talking about the 2014 numbers that we have here of Davis Road being 704,000 and South Boundary being 2,000,007?
Correct. And the numbers, of course, will change as we do our modeling. So when we come back, it may move around a little bit. But the numbers that we model out for capital improvement projects are based on what kind of revenues we expect to be able to collect. So, we could actually model out $25 million in projects, but if we don't collect the $25 million, we just simply don't do the projects. But that is correct. If it seems reasonable that we're going to bring in considerably less than that, we would look to see if we can maximize our dollars as best as possible by some sort of matching funds to grants and so on.
Okay, so then the remainder would remain in the East Side Parkway account, so to speak.
Well, the East Side Parkway would continue to be on the list of CIP projects until this board says that that's not a project that it wants to do. And in fact, even that would be subject to negotiation with TAMC. So TAMC has put a list of regional transportation improvement projects together. They reiterated that in 2005 when they did the reallocation. And what I should say is that, the idea here is to mitigate the base reuse plan. It's to move traffic. I usually call it move traffic north to south and east to west. You got to move traffic in order to mitigate the reuse plan. So it doesn't necessarily have to be called a this or a that, but it does have to perform that function. And so in the past, TAMC has worked with us to alter projects in some ways, as long as they achieve the mitigation and they move the traffic in a way that mitigates the reuse plan.
So if I may, So what I'm really concerned about is that the East Side Parkway not lose its priority status. While we may be waiting for construction funds or for the stars to align for that project, that those funds be available and ready when it is. I know that the people at CSUMB would like to see that traffic going around CSUMB so they don't have to put more bumps in the road. But thank you for that answer, and I just want to voice my support for the caretaker costs remaining in its CIP. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A comment and a question, or a comment and actually a request. We've been at MST been receiving requests from various entities on the former Fort Ord for transit service. For example, East Garrison Affordable Housing, the new Monterey County Health Clinic, including the interim nonprofit for persons with psychiatric disabilities that is going in this new building, the veterans. All of these uses that are either existing, about to be existing, or slated for this year or next, that are very intensive with persons that have a tendency to need public transportation. Looking at the CIP plan, there is no funding for public transportation until 2016. And we're concerned that we're not going to be able to meet these demands today and tomorrow and the coming months and the next couple of years while we wait for public transit to be funded as the CIP is currently drafted. What we are proposing, recognizing that the cost of a full-size transit bus is about a little less than $500,000, we recognize that that is unfundable under the current revenue stream. But our minibuses are slightly less than $100,000 each. And so what MST would like to propose for your consideration when this comes back next month is setting aside just under $100,000 in each of those years that are currently blank, 13, 14, 14, 15, and 15, 16, so that we can purchase these small minibuses and start meeting the demands that are already there or that are about to be there of affordable housing and medical needs for very low-income residents that are here on the Fort Ord or are seeking services in the Fort Ord. Thank you.
Thank you, Hunter. Other questions by board members? Yes, Jane?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, looking at sort of the sequencing of things, I know that in the county, in conversation about opening Intergarrison Road, has been trying to be sensitive to the needs of CSUMB to not have traffic just drive straight into CSUMB and hit those bumps. And kind of what we had discussed was really waiting to open Intergarrison Road to through traffic until the 8th Street improvements could be made so that people could wend their way around CSUMB instead of going through it. And so thinking about that, I look at the timing. It looks as though 8th Street has some funding that spans out over a period of 5 years starting in the next, not this coming fiscal year, but the one after that, while Intergarrison Road is all in the 2014-2015 year. And it just seems to me that if 8th Street essentially has to happen before East Garrison happens, we need to think about maybe shifting some of those priorities.
Good. Other questions by board members? Yes, Ian.
I'll try to be quick, Chair. I have the same concerns about the East Side Parkway losing its priorities. I understand that if the money's not there, then why plan? But it should not lose its priority status. When you talk about caretakers' costs, I keep seeing a shift from FORA to the land use jurisdictions of paying more of that cost. And to me, it's very difficult to pay that cost from the cities. That's FORA's responsibility. You know, we keep chipping away at what FORA should be paying for, and then all of a sudden the cities are paying for it. And I just want to put that on record that should be FORA's responsibilities for the caretakers' cost. Also, when we talk about contingencies and caretakers' costs, to be transparent, we're not talking about building removal. And now here about in surplus 2, we're talking about particular buildings in surplus 2. I think the board needs to know exactly which buildings the staff is talking about taking down and when they're talking about taking them down, and see if we can coordinate that.
Anything else?
That'll be it.
Okay. Any other comments or questions by board members? Saying none out to the public. Any public comment on the capital improvement program?
Hi, Scott Hilk with Marine Community Partners. Just a couple quick notes here. First, in Appendix B, there's a footnote that shows the fee that you just adopted at 26.4 goes up right away to $27,000, and it's a process that it seems like the board should be adopting the CIP program and then establishing the fee for that. And I think that as you follow through your next CIP program, you can calculate the fee and know what the impacts of the decisions that you're making as you're making them. The second comment is that there's an adjustment in the build-out program that we talked about in the admin meeting, wasn't really highlighted in the presentation, where the build-out of the development doesn't occur based on land use jurisdictions forecasts. And I believe, and that's what it was a week ago. I assume it's still the same. And a part of that that is inconsistent with the development agreements and the DDAs that, like on our project, that have been filed where we have performance schedules. And I'm sure some of the other projects have the same thing. And to not connect the two doesn't seem to be legitimate. And then the third point is that you need to make sure that the FORA program that you're adopting, if you're adopting something that goes out beyond 2020, has a funding program that pays for those mitigations. That's one of the key points that we've made from day one, and every time I've come up to the podium and talked about the fee program and having a fair fee, it needs to address making sure that we've got a program that is generating the revenue to pay for all of the fee programs. And part of that is based on FORA is still supposed to go away in 2020. So you have a CFD through 2020. If you extend your development schedule and your CIP beyond that, you either have to extend FORA with the other provisions for land sale revenues and tax increment, or come up with a new program that would be nexus-based to move forward. So I just want to make sure that you're thinking about that as you're going through the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next public speaker.
Thank you. Chrisanne Giles with the Building Industry Association. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on this item as well. I'm glad that the board is having these detailed conversations on the projects and the funding and the items that are included in the CIP program. We're concerned that the staff report creates a new method to establish the build-out scenarios. For staff, it's referenced that they review the submitted build-out forecasts that are received from the individual jurisdictions, and then they alter them to be what's described as realistic. That's a policy that should be set by the board or the jurisdictions, and it's not very transparent. The spreadsheet creates a new slow build-out model that seems to be different than the models that were previously presented to the board in the formulaic approach that we just completed. This was discussed at the admin committee meeting on Wednesday, and several of the jurisdictional representatives commented that they needed to see the build-out assumptions that they had submitted to FORA staff, that the data included in the spreadsheet was unclear and it didn't follow their submitted recommendations. They also pointed out that the slow absorption created for the spreadsheet didn't reflect the performance schedules that were included in builder agreements within the member jurisdictions, and that the individual cities would be the best judge of the expected build-out as they were aware of key information in the development agreements. It was also discussed that a substantial contingencies included in the CIP program. Under the new formulaic approach, these contingencies artificially raise the CFD fee, which negatively affects the financial contribution that's received by each one of your cities when land sales take place. The CFD fees are subtracted from the overall land value, and the contingencies included as part of the CFD fee should be removed or right-sized now that you have a formulaic approach that can update the CFD fee regularly. The formulaic approach reduces the programmatic risk you had before, but that's not reflected in the tables that are being considered for next year. The spreadsheets reference the CFD fee totals beyond 2020, but they don't include land sale, lease, or property tax revenues post-2020. We would ask that you direct the that the board direct the staff to consistently apply the program revenues, lease and land sales, property taxes in any future modeling for the formulaic calculation. If the CFD is referenced beyond 2020, the program revenue should also be included. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other members of the public wish to make public comment? Yeah, we've got another minute.
All right, my name is Calvin Angel, and I'm a veteran and member of this nonprofit group here. We three are all veterans, local in this community, and we are hopefully going to be involved in quite a few projects going to be taking place in this community in the near future. One of the most recent projects that we'd like to get started and working on here is a drop-in center for veterans in this community that we think is very important. We're not going to talk in great detail today about what we would like to have this board or have the community involved yet, but that's just one of the things that we're involved in, and we're going to have, I hope, in more detail later, how we hope to be able to help and participate with the board in general. My day job is working with the California Department of Veteran Affairs, but I'm speaking here today strictly as a veteran who is eager to get involved in the community, contribute something positive, as my partners here, and trying to give myself a quick time here because I don't want to drag this out. So as we go on and come forward before the board, my friend here, Eric, and Frank will introduce themselves and tell their part as well. Again, just from what we've heard today from the board, we hope that many of the things that you've spoken about, the projects that you've spoken about, are going to involve jobs for veterans. We know that veterans in this community, of course, would be, by way of the makeup of the community, largely minorities as well, African Americans as well as Hispanic community. So if you would definitely take that under consideration when bringing these projects into development, something that we hope to be instrumental in keeping before the board. And hopefully you all will be taking into consideration when you're looking at jobs as well. And as I said, we'll speak more on this later, but I'll let my friends introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm Eric Miller. I'm also a disabled vet. I actually was stationed here at Fort Ord, transitioned and became a contracting specialist here, and I'm the one that put the boarding up on all the buildings here. So it's actually kind of disappointing to see that my work is still up on the here on base here. We would definitely we want to get more involved in the community here. We do have still a lot of veterans that's still here in the area. We want to keep the integrity of the monument. It's a great move. I know we have the cemetery that's on that's still being put together, but I'm not sure where we're at with that yet. We also have the clinic, and most of us, we don't want to travel down to Palo Alto every other month or what have you just to go get our treatments. So we definitely need the board and everybody's support in trying to help us move forward and getting these programs put together. And once again, we're still a young generation here that, we need to get involved and we need to get some things going for this community so we can keep the integrity going. And like I said, we're here to assist in any way we can, and we will definitely be more diligent in trying to step forward and see what help needs to be done. Thank you.
Good evening, board. My name is Frank Green. I'm a full-time minister, so my heart goes out when I see the community in need, not just in the job areas, but also just in personal needs. So besides being a veteran, the need is great in our communities as far as Monterey County is concerned. I don't think any of us are, well, at least us three anyway, are directly from Monterey County, but nevertheless, It doesn't matter where we came from. It matters that we're here right now, and we have to serve a purpose right now. So we just asking for you all's blessings to be with us as we move forward, and then our blessings to shoot right back at you all as we move forward. We appreciate the time, and thank you all for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you, gentlemen. I think I speak for the board by we appreciate your wanting to get involved in helping the community any way you possibly can. Again, thank you very much. I need to interject right now. We've run at the end, out at the end of our rope again. I think Mayor Pro Tem Frank O'Connell jinxed us by going for half an hour. If I could have a small motion, not a large motion, a small motion. So we just need just a few more things to do to extend. Okay. Ralph?
I'll move we extend our meeting to 6.
Okay, we've got it. It won't take that long, I'm sure. We have a motion by Mayor Bill Camp and second from
Second.
Mayor Rubio. Thank you very much. We have another half an hour. Any other members of the public wish to address the board with regard to the capital improvement? Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. This is my 7.5 hour. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying...
Excuse me. I had one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to ask staff if they had any timing for the RUAP, the water augmentation program, when that may be starting up again, and maybe we could get a board presentation on that in the future.
Ralph, we need to make a vote on the extension of the meeting first.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to extend the meeting. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Anybody opposed?
No.
Okay, raise your hands if you're opposed. 1, 2, 3, and those in favor, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We beat you. Okay.
Was
Okay, I'm sorry,
unanimous.
Ralph, go ahead and, with your comment,
Well,
please.
and usually when you have to extend a meeting, you can finish the item you're on, and then you have to extend the meeting.
We're still on public comment.
Yeah. So anyways, the answer?
The Regional Urban Water Augmentation Program is a component of the Water Wastewater Oversight Committee's work that's currently underway. As you saw earlier on the agenda, there was an idea of deferring budgets and rates. A report on the status of the RUAP would come back when that returns. And I'm sorry that Director Moore is not here. He could maybe have mentioned Marina Coast Water District, under contract with FORA, is obligated to do that, and we're working with them on bringing the schedule back.
Thank you.
Okay, any other members of the public wish to address the board with regard to the capital improvement program? Okay, seeing none, back to the board. I would entertain a motion to receive the report. Okay, okay, we have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell and a second by Mayor Rubio. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We're almost done. Next item, we have an information. Yes. I'm sorry. Leave it past 5-3. And just 3. They were against, right? But there were 5 for it. Yes. Yeah, for the record, we did vote to extend the meeting. Okay. Next is an information item. It's the fiscal year 13-14 preliminary budget. Michael?
Yes, Chair Edel and members of the board, the draft preliminary operating budget is normally presented to the board for adoption in the month of June. Typically in the month of May, we provide a relatively brief staff report that outlines the direction being taken by the Finance Committee. Last year, the board asked that we be more thorough in the presentation that the board would see in the month of May. And so today, the draft preliminary operating budget that you're about to see is more comprehensive than we've done in past years. And I want to thank Chair Mayor Camp of the Finance Committee and all the members of the Finance Committee, including Councilman Norton, Mayor Pro Tem Oglesby, and others, for their work on the Finance Committee in making this happen. The first slide of the slides that you have in front of you would indicate that the revenues and expenditures that are presented are on a single chart. The history of this is that in 2008, the Finance Committee wanted to make sure that there would be one place where the board members could review all of those expenses and revenues in one place. And so that's what you see before you. That's a format that's been used every year since 2008. The Finance Committee met on April 2nd and 25th, and after looking in detail the background numbers that provide for the revenues and expenditures, they're recommending approval, but that's pending the adoption of certain CIP factors. Some of those were mentioned in the last budget report and will come before the board next month. The FY 13-14 budget will come in as balanced, and there will be sufficient funds, as you will note on the slide that indicates. I think we're here. Nope, went the wrong way. It looks like. All right. Seems to be, there it goes. Okay. On this particular preliminary budget, you'll note that the ending fund balance is about $8 million, and there is a full summary that's included that looks at all of the items that the board has asked for. It includes a comparison of the FY 13-14 with what was approved, the mid-year and the actual from FY 12-13. The notes that you'll find in the far right column note where there are distinct differences and what the projections are based on. In making the most significant analyses here, you'll find that there are comments that note that the items here are based on the draft CIP budget. Those numbers will change based on some of the comments we heard today from members of the board and based on what's presented to the board for adoption in the CIP budget in June. So those two items are likely to change. Also, please note that we are factoring in a higher number for contractual services. That, in fact, is because we anticipate higher legal fees, and we note that there are two initiatives that are before the community that are likely to add costs to our expenses of the coming year. I also wanted noted that in terms of staffing under the expenditure, salaries and benefits, the potential salary benefits adjustments are not included in this budget. Those will not be presented to the executive committee until next month. Some highlights. The salary and benefits adjustments, as I mentioned, will be at the executive committee on June 5th, and they'll come back to the board for its meeting on June 21st. There's a potential for increases in multiple different areas. What those will actually be is a subject of a conversation the executive committee hopes to have with staff. The board has some rather specific steps that it would need to take. And as I mentioned before, this budget will be subject to the decisions made on the CIP revenues and expenses that are before you under the separate budget item. It also would include the executive committee's recommendations regarding salary and benefits. We anticipate when we bring this to you by June 21st, we will also be looking at much more detailed understanding of the costs of some of the legal and initiative processes that are underway. So, Chair Edelin, I'm prepared to answer any questions. I was able to get that done in the 4 minutes I promised.
Okay, if we could have the lights, please, also. We're having too many people falling asleep here in the dark. Any questions on this item from board members? Yeah.
I do have a question. I know I sit on this finance committee, and we looked at this and approved it for recommendation, but something came up this morning in our post-reassessment committee of discussion that you reported on earlier. And one of those was the regional design guidelines. And this morning we learned that this has not really been proceeded on within the FORA offices. And part of that is it needs to be budgeted for. I don't remember a discussion about that. And I want to make sure that there's room for that as we're going forward in our reassessment, post-reassessment work to know if there's a direction given that there's going to be funding for it.
Yeah, Councilwoman Morton, you're accurate. The Finance Committee, and you may recall this, did set aside some funds for looking at the post-reassessment policy actions that the board might take in the coming fiscal year. However, there were funds we anticipated actions that might be things like looking at CEQA, for example, or maybe updating the plan, updating the maps, making all the corrections, maybe some republication in certain circumstances. We did not include funding that would allow us to complete the Regional Urban Design Guideline program. We have done the Highway 1 Urban Design Guideline program in the past, and we found that that had, in I think $2005, $30,000 cost. If we were to do the Regional Urban Design Guidelines, FORA would do those rather than have those be a component of projects that came forward, which has been the policy in the past. It would run maybe about $200,000 for all of the Regional Urban Design Guidelines. And if that's the board's wish, we can include that in the budget that comes back in June.
Through the
Yes,
chair, if
Jane.
I could just comment on that. It did just come up this morning in our advisory committee meeting, or whatever we are. But in reading the board packet for the Fort Ord subcommittee of the Board of Supervisors, I see that in one of the tables, the staff refers to how far along county staff is on policies that we have responsibility for, and specific to the design guidelines, they say that FORA is going to do it. So I think there may be this assumption that it's going to be taken care of by someone else, so we might want to figure on living up to that promise. So I think it's a good idea to put some money in the budget to allow for that.
Other board member questions? Seeing none, out to the public. Any public comments with regard to the preliminary budget?
Hi, Scott Hill, Marina Community Partners, and I'll try to be very brief again. Just a couple quick comments, and again, I think all of these items are interrelated. The CFD, the fees that are calculated in the CFD, the CIP that was the last item, and this item that has administrative preliminary budget numbers are all interrelated. The methodology that's used to present the budget, and I understand that there was direction from previous boards or finance committee to roll everything together, but when you mix everything together, it's impossible to tell what line items are being designated for which programs and projects, and what sources of funds are being used to pay for the various projects. We understand that FORA has ESCA programs, CIP programs, reassessment programs. You know, there's a number of different things that this board is asking staff to do, but we can't tell who and what costs are assigned to each program. In the private sector, programs are separated out with their own sources and uses of funds, and it makes the management of those programs and the budgeting very transparent. So we would ask that there's a more transparent methodology, and we understand that FORA staff is also offering to have a meeting to, provide detail on this, and we look forward to that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next public speaker. Okay, seeing none, back to the board. Entertain a motion to receive the report.
Second.
Okay, Supervisor Parker, the motion, and the second by Councilwoman Gail Morton. Okay, any discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Close to the last item on the agenda. We're looking at a contract to perform election services. Michael, explain that, please.
Chair Edelin, members of the board, the request here is that the board authorize the executive officer to work with the board chair and authority council in moving ahead with securing the appropriate contract for services in the assumption that FORA will have to validate signatures and could potentially perform an election for the two initiatives that have been filed. The board report provides some data about each of those, and we provided the board with the numerous inquiries we've received from the public regarding each of these initiatives. We don't know exactly what the final cost will be. But there are two methods we can use to make this happen. We want to work as efficiently as we can with the chair and the authority council to make that happen. We respectfully request that the board authorize us to have this ability to make the contract happen.
The key is to make FORA act so we don't delay the process. The last thing we want to do is if one or both of these petitions goes through, we don't want anybody waiting and blaming FORA for obstructing justice and so forth. So any questions by board members?
Question.
Yes. Ron.
Yeah. So you would have the authority to enter into a contract, but we would see the contract before it was executed? How would that work? We don't have an idea of how much it's going to cost. And would that, is that pending that both one or both the petitions get enough signatures?
I don't think that we are at risk of waiting until the June meeting before we have to authorize and execute a contract. However, it is possible for at least the validation of signatures that we would need someone on board before the next time the FORA board meets. And so therefore, until we have a contract in place, unless you want a special meeting, we're asking for your ability to at least enter in a contract and move ahead with the validation of signatures.
Well, I don't know about a special meeting, but so it'd be a two-part contract. You know, one just to do the signatures, and should we need to move forward with the second half?
It would be my assumption that we would have a contract with one entity, but that all we would move ahead with at this point would be validation of signatures. John Giffen may have some additional comments.
Okay, that's clarity.
Yes, that's correct.
Other questions? Yes, Jane.
Thank you. Yes, I think as it relates to the signatures verification, I would encourage FORA to contract with the county elections department. Because of the confidentiality of the signatures, the elections department might have to monitor it anyway, and then you'd have double expense. So to keep that in mind. Also, when we're looking at if it might be a different entity to actually conduct the election, please remember that we are a Voting Rights Act county. We're subject to those rules, and that is not that's a pretty specialized thing. So again, I would just want to make sure that we contract with an entity that really knows how to do this, so that we don't run into problems of FORA being blamed for having a process that doesn't operate properly.
Good point. Other questions by board members? Seeing none now, I'm sorry, Ian, go ahead.
Thank the chair. I guess my question is staff thinking about contracting with, it may be too far ahead, but contracting with anyone else other than the county?
Yes.
Okay. And I agree with the mayor. I would like to see that contract or know about it, because I would be uncomfortable with that aspect of it. I think the county is our experts in this area, and I think Supervisor Parker's comments go to that. So, but staff is free to bring that back. So that was just a comment.
Yes, we've been in communication fairly regularly with the county in this regard, but several of your colleague jurisdictions have recommended others that have performed elections in this area that also could conduct a countywide election. And so therefore, in order to make sure that the board is fully apprised of all, and that if the process looks at all options, that we look at all.
I think the intent is not to sign $1 million contract when all we're doing is getting a few signatures up front and whatever that would cost. So again, we want to have the board approve as much of this as we possibly can, making sure we don't fall behind.
And Mr. Chair, so I think what I'm hearing is that the board would like to see the contract before it's entered into.
Yes.
So if that can be circulated to us, or whatever the mechanism is, so that we have the opportunity to sign off on it. Great.
What's $1 million between friends? Any other questions?
Let me make sure that I understand, Chair. You want to see the contract to determine if you have any concerns about it, or do you want it to be held for a board action?
For me, I think we should move forward. But yes, I would like to see the contract before it's signed. I don't think, for me personally, I need to approve the contract. Either the company that we choose, whether it's county or someone else, is credible people, and they've done it before, but it's natural for us to see the contract also.
Other questions by board members? Okay, out to the public. Any public comment with regard to the contract to perform election services? Yes.
Hello, Kersan Giles again, BIA Bay Area. This may have been covered in the item that you referenced from the closed session previously, but it would seem that any initiative whose intent is to alter the base reuse plan would be in conflict with the adopted plan and therefore not permissible under the federal mandates that govern the planning of military bases. Since this has been presented as an additional FORA cost, we would urge the board to seek out an independent legal opinion with an elections expert before you concede to any costs associated with an initiative that would seek to alter the base reuse plan. There have been at least 2 instances in California state law where such initiatives have not been allowed. The first one was in 2003, and that was Save Our NTC Incorporated versus the City of San Diego. And the second one was Citizens for Jobs in the Economy versus the County of Orange, and that was in 2002. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other public comment?
Hello, my name's Quavia. I was wondering if the public would be able to have access to the contract before it's approved. If it was me personally signing a contract, of course I would read it before I signed it, so I would say the taxpayers would like to have access to it, and I would ask for that. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other public comment? Okay, back to the board. Would someone like to entertain a motion outlining what we just discussed? Jane?
Why did I give it a shot? So I move that that the board give direction to staff to proceed with developing a contract at the very least for the verification of signatures, and that contract before being signed either be circulated to the board for comment or possibly a quick special meeting to allow it to be available to the public and to the full board for discussion. Either way.
Yes, Michael, clarification.
There's no intent to. This is not a closed session issue. This is not a contract. It needs. We would suggest maybe posting it on the web and distributing that link so anyone that wants to look at it can. It's a public contract, so maybe notifying the board members and then, based on the response, determine if there needs to be further action. Is that a possibility?
Jane? Yes.
I just had a question while you were at the microphone, if I might. Is it feasible, Jane's comment earlier, I should call you Supervisor Parker, I suppose, Supervisor Parker's comment earlier about the elections department for the County of Monterey is very efficient at signature verification. That seems to be the place to go for that. Are we looking at 2 contracts perhaps? One that our county is verifying the signatures, and a second contract for the additional election services? I just see how the staff report's written, and I'm trying to understand if that's quite feasible. That the elections department would do the verification of the signatures and perhaps do the rest, but the elections department could also do the verification of signatures, and FORA enters into a contract with someone else for the balance of the services. I'm reading your staff recommendation.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. The second is the option. We are only so far talking with the elections department, but several of the jurisdictions have recommended looking at some alternatives. So we are, and clearly there are alternatives that have a comprehensive election experience in conducting elections. And so we probably likely, if we went that second route, it would be 2 contracts.
Okay, thank you.
I think our intent is to lower the cost down below $1 million. So I believe, Ralph, you have next comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to see if we're going to address the issue that was brought up about the appropriateness. I know that there was a lawsuit filed, and I don't know if it was filed under those guidelines.
John?
What is the question?
The point that was brought up about the appropriateness of the initiatives given the federal laws regarding military bases.
That issue needs to be addressed legally. It has not yet, and I think it's a good point. But there's been no analysis done at this point on that issue.
Other, yes, Ian.
Through the chair, I would suggest that the board needs to ask our council to look into that. We're all for the initiatives going forward and the public's ability to vote on some of these issues, but if it's illegal, then I think it's our obligation to know that going forward. Let's not get down the road and say, oops, I didn't know, when we had someone from the public sit up here and say, you guys should look into it. I think the board needs to direct our council to find the answer to that.
John, can we add that as a friendly amendment if well, hold on. Could it be
Yes,
added?
you can.
Okay, it could be added as a motion. So we have a motion on the floor and no second thus far. Jane, would you entertain a friendly amendment to your motion?
Well, actually, to me, that is a whole separate question.
Okay.
I'd rather get the contract thing
Okay.
worked out, and then if we want to give further direction about, and my impression of what the direction we gave council was that should an elections expert be needed, that he was going to look into that
He'll
and
look
find
into
it. So I think that's been taken care of. So I'd rather just keep the contract about the elections process, its own item.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor by Supervisor Parker. Do I have a second to that motion? And who's second? Okay, Mayor Camp, as a second. Any discussion on the motion? Ian?
I appreciate Supervisor clarifying the motion and saying that my question was already taken care of earlier then. My concern. Thank you.
Okay. We have any other discussion? We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, next.
Chair Edelin, you have a number of items under Executive Officer's report. It includes outstanding receivables, which is information.
Michael, it's 6 o'clock. We need one final motion to extend our enjoyable time here for a couple of minutes. It shouldn't take much longer.
I move we extend the meeting for 5 more minutes.
Okay, we have a motion by Mayor
what
Pro Tem, 5 minutes, and Councilwoman Morton.
Public comment.
Yeah, I know, but we haven't gotten there yet. Okay. So we're going to do public comment now. Any member of the public wishing to address the board may do so now. It has to be on an item not on the agenda that we've covered already. If there is an item on the agenda we haven't covered, you've got 3 minutes. Please, sir.
Through the chair.
5
through the chair.
o'clock,
Point.
huh, Jerry?
Okay, hold on. We've got, yes, Ian?
I made my motion to extend the meeting
After.
to include public comment.
We can't, by law, we can't limit public comment.
No, that's what I just said.
Oh, so in other words, after public comment?
Yes, 5 minutes after
5
public
minutes, okay.
comment.
Thank you very much.
Ron Cheshire with the Monterey Santa Cruz Building Construction Trades Council. I got to talk to the veterans group here out in the hallway, and we'll be discussing more with them. But, this whole issue in regards to developers' fees has been a long one. Looks like you've successfully completed it. The second step, I think when we started the process, the fees were up around $46,000. And now they're to 26. And for the 3,500 entitled homes out there waiting to be built, that's about, 70 million bucks. And if you could have given them another 4,000 down to 22, that would have been another 14. And we do remember, the public does remember, that these were the people that held a gun to your head in Sacramento in regards to the extension. even mentioned in her letter. Now, I would like to thank FORA and the Carpenters Union for trying to have a prevailing wage seminar. And I will tell you that each sitting jurisdiction that votes in this group is desperately in need of it. Even for your own cities. Workers in construction doing public works lose millions of dollars a year. It's stolen from them. It's happening right now within your own jurisdiction, even here at FORA. It's very difficult to prove. But I would assume that all of your staffs and all of the developers out here know all they need to know. Therefore, they're totally informed. And I guess everyone will have no problem whatsoever when their name winds up on the next lawsuit as a defendant. Their personal names. So we would really like to see you reach out to your staffs and let's get some participation. There was a lot of time, effort, and money on your part put into this. And it's just the workers of this community. You totally ignored something that they need to have done on their behalf. So thank you very much. It's been a nice Friday. And we'll see you later. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other members of the public? All right. There's enthusiasm there.
Good evening. Margaret Davis with Friends of the Fort Ord Warhorse. I don't know if this is on or is it after hours. You talk a lot about Fort Ord. I want you to come out and enjoy Fort Ord. Come to the 3rd annual Fort Ord Warhorse Day at the Marine Equestrian Center on May 18th. That's next Saturday from 10 to 2. Arrive at 10 is my tip because that's when the color guard, the national anthem, some original music for the national anthem by DLI Brass Band. We'll have a little talk on the National Monument by Gail Morton. And it's a very colorful family event. It'll also get you, if you're so inclined, out on the trails of Fort Ord, really using the Fort Ord space. There are 2 bike rides offered, one that makes an 11-mile loop to the monument and down to the state park, and one is just a little pee-wee kiddie ride, just 1 mile round trip to the World War II Sports Center there on 2nd Avenue and back. My first bike ride, or if you're really out of shape and don't mind riding with the kids, you're very welcome to come along on that ride. So please come, May 18th, Saturday, 10 to 2. Hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? All right.
I just wanted to clarify, this is like not on the agenda. I wanted to speak about Monterey Downs briefly.
You may.
Oh, okay. I wanted to mention that I was very disappointed to read, if this is true, because I can't always verify that it's true, but if it is true, that an official that has voting power over the Monterey Downs project said he doesn't care if this project is moral or not. The important thing is jobs. And I want to really strongly voice my opinion in my testimony that morality is definitely essential to our survival as a free nation, and that religion and freedom of religion and morality is indispensable to our freedom. And many of our veterans have, given up some of their lives and their health and well-being for us, for our freedom. And I would say that as citizens, we would definitely want to support morality and not introduce organized crime, drug cartels. I heard, for example, that one horse racing company, the owner was a member of the Zeta Mexican cartel. and also prostitution sometimes, all sorts of crimes, vices that definitely will be very costly, not only morally but financially as well. So I really want to encourage the board, anyone who has authority over this decision, to please oppose this project, and I definitely oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other members of the public wishing to address the board? Saying none, public comment period is closed. Next, we have the executive officer's report, and our executive officer has assured me to be very, very fast.
Yes, Chair Edelin, members of the board, under the executive officer's report, we have an item about outstanding receivables, which reports to you on the status. It is not changed, but it is consistent on the one item that's left. Under Habitat Conservation Update, I want to make sure that it's clear that we continue to make progress toward the habitat conservation, and there is a schedule that's included in your board report. I know all the board members are focused and paying attention to that. Under travel report, in here we note the trips that we are making to Sacramento to move the property transfer related to the Central Coast Veterans Cemetery ahead. And please note that members of the Executive Committee and staff are going to be at the Association of Defense Communities National Summit in Washington, D.C., as well as being there for our annual legislative mission to meet with our legislative officials to pursue the funding for building removal, for habitat conservation, that you will find in the legislative agenda. In the Administrative Committee report, you will find reports on the ongoing work of the Administrative Committee, which was reported to you twice today. You also have the Finance Committee, which was reported to you twice today, and the Post Reassessment Advisory Committee, which was reported at least twice today. And finally, the Veterans Issues Advisory Committee continues to meet to seek ways to support veterans issues. That includes the potential for the ongoing fundraising to make sure that the endowment is funded, whether it's by eleemosynary contributions and means, or if it's by contributions that may be made or loans by jurisdictions. And then finally, Water Wastewater Oversight Committee is included in your board packet. Chair, I am complete.
Any questions from board members? Saying none, out to the public. Any questions from members of the public? Saying none. Thank you very much. Any items from members? Saying none, ladies and gentlemen, we're adjourned. Thank you very much. And just think, if we started at 3:30, it'd now be 7:30. So we have some time on our hands.